Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you join me. And don't forget to like, and let me know what you think in the comments. Samantha. I heard Rosalind ask, hopefully as she picked up the phone. I was calling her because she had recently come across an anomalous VHS tape of a man burying a premonition he had written down in my cemetery, convinced that it would one day be of great value to me. She had showed it to me, and I had of course agreed to see if I could find it. I rose. Yeah, it's me, I replied, unable to hide my disappointment. I dug around in the area where the guy buried his time capsule, and I couldn't find anything. Whoever picked up and turned off the camera at the end of the video must have taken the time capsule too. Yeah, I figured that, but it was worth a shot. Thanks for checking anyway, Rosalind said consolingly. The video looked like it was taken during the late autumn, and if the the wisps were there, that means it had to have been on Halloween, right? Yep. And the only reason anyone would be in my cemetery on Halloween would be a descendant of Artaxerxes, Crow looking to honor their pact with Persephone. I replied. If we assume the video was taken during the 90s, the most likely candidate would be Erasmus Crow, Elam's grandfather. Elam doesn't know anything about any prophecy that was recovered the night Erasmus sacrificed himself, but he does remember that his father Ephraim went to the cemetery after midnight that Halloween. So it's completely possible that Erasmus left a message for him about the time capsule before the wisps got him. For all we know, Ephraim destroyed whatever was in the time capsule as soon as he dug it up, but if he did keep it, Seneca would have it now. You're sure? She asked. Mim. Since Elam had been cut out of his father's will, Seneca was able to use his position as his business partner to claim most of his assets. I explained. If Seneca had read the premonition that had been meant for me, that might explain why he was so keen to get me into the Ophion occult order. Artaxerxes wrote in his journal that he thought one of his descendants would enact some vaguely defined iconoclasm when the stars aligned. Elam's convinced that would have been his daughter if she had survived, and that I've effectively taken up her mantle in assuming responsibility for the cemetery. If Seneca does have the time capsule, Emrys or even Ivy can just order him to hand it over, right? Can you see if she'll do that?
Well, actually,
Rosalind stammered awkwardly. She's listening right now, isn't she? I asked flatly. Sorry, Samantha. She apologized sheepishly. That's all right. I understand. I sighed. Ms. Noor, I'm assuming you saw the video too and authorized Rose to show it to me. I think you'll agree that it's imperative that I know what was in that time capsule. I'm not even asking for it back. I just want to look at it. Is that something that can be arranged? The line was completely silent for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if the call had been anticlimactically dropped mid-conversation. I'll arrange it. A posh-British accent finally replied in an assertive tone. I'll send Ms. Romero around to your place of employment tomorrow afternoon to pick you up. You may bring your girlfriend and your familiar along if you wish. Before I could object or even ask any follow-up questions, there was a sharp click, and the line went dead. Ibizem Rosalind hadn't even had a chance to knock on the front door of Eve's Eden of Esoterica before Genevieve pulled it open and positioned herself protectively between her and me, folding her arms and glaring down at her with an intimidating gaze.
Hi, Eve,
Rose said, adopting a contrite stance as she clutched her hands in front of her. Where are you taking us? Genevieve demanded. Evie, sweetie, relax. We have a pact with Emrys, and the OO reports to him now. They couldn't hurt us if they wanted to. I reminded her gently, placing my hand on her shoulder and trying to pull her back a bit. That didn't stop Seneca from inviting us to a play where he summoned yet another banished god into our realm. She countered before sharply turning back to face Rosalind. Answer the question. The Crow's old estate, a short drive outside of town, she responded. Seneca says Artaxerxes left an old spellwork vault behind, one he's made no progress in opening. He can't make any promises, but if what you're looking for is anywhere, it's in there. Genevieve and I both immediately looked behind me and to our right, where my spirit familiar had manifested at the mention of his old home. Elam's here, I take it. Rose asked as she peered fruitlessly in the direction we were looking. He is. If he says anything he wants you to know, I'll tell you, I replied. I know what she's talking about, and I can't open it. My father never gave me the combination, Elam said. He says he doesn't know how to open the vault, I repeated. Seneca says that the mere presence of a crow, living or dead, should be enough to let him crack the vault open. It's sort of a two-factor authorization thing, Rosalind explained. So Seneca will be there then. Genevieve asked in disdain. He will, yes. The deal is that if you help him get it open, you can claim the documents that were specifically addressed to you, but everything else is still part of the Crow estate and legally his, Rosalind said. Genevieve groaned at the horrible offer, and I turned to give Elam a sympathetic glance. Are you okay with that? I asked, helping Chamberlain claim the last final scraps of what was rightfully mine. Sure, why not? He sighed as he hung his head and pinched the bridge of his nose. Someone gave their life to try to get that message to you. We need to see it. Elam's on board, I told Rosalind. So you'll do it, she asked hopefully. We'll do it. Lottie promised she'd watch the shop for us and fill in for me at yoga. Genevieve relented. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rose said with relief. You two don't know how important this is. Ivy doesn't think it was random luck that I picked that tape from Orville's box. I've had another encounter with the effulgent one back in May, and if I understood him correctly, he thinks the conflict between the darlings is spiraling into some kind of clash of the titans. Ivy thinks my connection to him has given me a subconscious insight into this, and whatever was in that time capsule could be vital. So long as what we're doing helps keep the peace, we're willing to help. I nodded. Awesome, thank you. I parked just down the street a little bit, she said as she gestured in the vague direction of her electric crossover. Did you want to sit in the front with me or in the back with your girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend. Genevieve corrected her in a matter-of-fact tone. Wait, what? She asked, looking at me wide-eyed with a mix of shock and pity. I didn't have the heart to torment her like that, so with an awkward smile, I simply held up my left hand, showing her the rose gold ring with wrought maple leaves encircling a morganite centerpiece on my ring finger.
Oh my God, don't do that.
She shouted with relief as she threw her arms around me. Congratulations. When did you two get married? Last Midsummer's Eve. We were handfasted in a small civil ceremony. We basically eloped, I explained. Neither of us proposed, at least not formally if you were wondering. We just decided that after 5 years together, we were pretty confident that our relationship was permanent and that it would be best to make it official. But why didn't you have a real wedding, though? I love weddings, she asked. Samantha wouldn't have been comfortable being the center of attention like that, and traditional weddings are really just a form of conspicuous consumption, which I'm not comfortable with. Genevieve replied, holding up a ring of white gold with beech leaves around a green beryl gemstone, the spring to my autumn. And I've read that having big, overhyped wedding ceremonies isn't great for relationships either. It's important to manage expectations, and a big wedding can feel more like the end of a relationship than the beginning. Ooh, you've just got to make everything political, don't you? Rosalind groaned. So who was there? Lottie, Genevieve's half-brother and his girlfriend, my sister and her family, and my dad, I explained. I did invite my mom on the condition that she be respectful, and she chose not to attend, which was considerate of her. She's not hateful or anything, but she's never been shy about the fact that she wishes I had turned out more like my sister, and she and Genevieve in particular don't get along. But my dad still came, which I really appreciated. He gave her away. Genevieve said with a slight roll of her eyes. It's traditional, I teased. So are diamonds, Rosalind remarked after a closer inspection of my wedding ring. Not that it's any of my business, but what about your parents? Eve. I was basically raised by my great-aunt. My dad's a deadbeat I'm not on speaking terms with, and though I'm not on bad terms with my mom, we're not close and she doesn't live around here anymore, so she wasn't there either, she replied. Can we get going now? We can talk more on the drive if you want. Yeah, sure thing. Seneca will probably throw a tantrum if we keep him waiting too long. Rosalind agreed. Right this way, Ms. and Mrs. Fawn. I am not Mrs. Fawn, I objected. Sorry, babe, but your dad did give you to me, so you are now officially Fawn. She teased me. It's traditional. The ride towards the old Crow estate was mostly occupied with talk of mine and Genevieve's wedding, which I was grateful for. Rosalind's crossover was a company car from Thorntech, which included proprietary Level 3 self, driving software, and other advanced AI features. I had no doubt that everything we said and did in that car was being recorded and analyzed, so I wasn't eager to let any potentially sensitive information slip out. Once we were about 3 miles outside of town, we took a turn down a cider road that was thickly shrouded with evergreens. This went on for another half-mile or so before we turned down a long, winding driveway that terminated at a small, stone mansion enclosed by a cobblestone fence. There was an old copper gate that had turned green with time, and as we approached it was opened by one of Seneca Chamberlain's personal security guards. There were already 2 other vehicles parked outside of the manor, a black SUV which presumably belonged to the guards, and extended Rolls-Royce Ghost, which could only have belonged to Seneca. Doesn't Seneca drive a Bentley? I asked. He drives Bentleys, plural, Rosalind replied. He's chaffiered in his Royces, and the Aston Martins are just for show. He obviously doesn't share your aversion to conspicuous consumption. If he ever had a wedding, it would be a banger. Not as expensive as the divorce, but pretty swanky. After she parked us a generous distance away from Seneca's prestigious motor carriage, I got out and took a moment to inspect the Crow's old estate. It was fairly long with steep and pointed black roofs and multiple towers and chimneys. The weather-worn walls were covered in creeping ivy, and numerous weeping cypress trees swayed about in the wind upon the grounds. The whole place gave off an air of forlorn isolation, and I couldn't help but be reminded of the first time I laid eyes upon Elam standing watch over a grave in our cemetery. Elam had already made himself manifest again, and he now stood patiently by the front stairs, looking up at his old house with apparent detachment. Is it hard for you being here? I asked gently. I couldn't have taken it with me anyway, right? He shrugged. I'd take haunting your cemetery over this funeral parlor any day. Have you ever come back here before? After your death, I asked. No, I never saw much point in that. I don't really feel much nostalgia for the old place, he said, his gaze steadily surveying the grounds from one end to the other. I imagine it must have been difficult growing up here, isolated with such a weird old family, I said. I don't have any right to complain, he claimed, though he hung his head slightly. It wasn't that bad, at least not up until the very end. I took a hold of his hand, which if you're not an experienced necromancer is something you definitely shouldn't try at home, and walked with him up the steps to the front door. I was just about to knock when the door was thrown open by Seneca's odd little butler Woodbeard. Good day, Miss Sumner. We're very pleased you were able to meet us here on such short notice. He greeted me with a curt bow. It's Mrs. Fawn now, Rosalind shouted from behind us. No, it isn't. I'm still Miss Sumner, I corrected her. As requested, my wife and my spirit familiar are here to help Mr. Chamberlain access a vault which we believe may contain a document that is addressed to me. Master Chamberlain has already set to work at that task and is eagerly awaiting your arrival. Woodbeard replied. If you'll kindly follow me, I shall take you to him at once. We all filed into the house and saw that in the years since Seneca had taken possession of it, he had removed everything of any possible interest or value. Only the occasional Spartan furnishing like a lamp or a desk had been left behind. Seneca's not using this as a guest house. I see, Genevieve commented. But it's not on the market either. He must really want what's in that vault. It's to be his or no one's, Mom. He's not one to part with a treasure once it's fallen into his hands, Woodbeard said. Then why didn't he ever ask for our help before? I asked. He's known about Elam for years. If you had accepted my offer to join the Ophian occult order, rest assured breaking into this blasted vault would have been amongst the first things I would have ordered you to do. I heard Seneca shout from the next room, obviously within earshot. After that, There were simply more important things going on, and you've never really been inclined to help me unless you believed it also served some kind of common good. If you were simply more amicable to cash incentives, we could have gotten this chore done with ages ago. We passed into the next room and saw Seneca bent over in front of a tall iron door with the enlarged face of an aged and wizened man rising out of it, a face that Genevieve and I immediately recognized. "That's Artaxerxes' crow," I remarked as I cautiously approached it. I tentatively stretched my hand out towards it, the air becoming rapidly more chill the closer I got. I chose to snap my hand back rather than touch it, and then noticed a plaque mount above the frame. "Gold is for the mistress, silver for the maid, copper for the craftsman cunning at his trade," I read aloud. "Good," said the Baron, sitting in his hall. "But iron, cold iron, is master of them all." It's a Kipling poem, written about a century after Shruxes made this thing, but I guess Eratosthenes thought it was fitting, Seneca commented. "The vault is made from cold iron," I asked. "Exceptionally pure and alchemically enhanced cold iron," Seneca expounded. "Repels ghosts, witches, fae, and is strong enough that I can't just blast it open without risking serious damage to whatever's inside." "What's cold iron?" Rosalind asked. "It's kind of a broad term for any iron alloy that's had its innate thaumaturgical properties enhanced," I replied. "Basically, it draws astral and psionic energy out of you like ordinary metal conducts heat. That's what makes it cold. The more of those you have, the stronger the effect." "Wait, the whole vault is made out of cold iron, not just the door?" Genevieve asked. "Then, even if we open it, Samantha and I won't be able to go in. Neither will Alam." "You say that like it's a bug and not a feature," Seneca smirked. "It's fine, Evie. We'll still be able to see inside, and it can't be that big," I said. "Elam, were you ever in there when you were still alive?" "Never. By tradition, only the patriarch of the family was permitted access to this vault, a title which my father refused to pass down to me," he replied. "Mind the P word in front of the witches. You'll get them all riled up," Seneca said. "Wait, Alam had pussy in there?" Rosalind asked. "No, that's not what he said," I replied promptly. "Seneca, Rose said that you already know how to open the vault, and that you just required Elam's presence." "That's correct. The mechanical lock isn't actually all that sophisticated, and a bit of rudimentary safe cracking was all that was needed to work out the combination," he replied. "There are 3 dials, each with 9 numbers apiece, and a 7-digit code. But no matter what I try, every time I enter the combination it realizes I'm not a crow and the lock resets." "I know how it works," Elam added. "I just have to stand in front of the door and look the effigy of Artaxerxes in the eye as the combination is entered." "But no member of the Crow family ever tried getting to this vault from beyond the grave before, right?" Genevieve asked. "It obviously wasn't intended for that, being made out of cold iron. Has even a living crow just stood in front of the door while someone else input the combination? If the spell work here is as impenetrable as you think, this might not work. Artaxerxes obviously put a lot of work into this, and it's hard to imagine there are many contingencies he didn't anticipate." I agreed. "Which is precisely why we'll all be standing well out of harm's way while Woodbead enters the code," Seneca explained, fetching a small folded piece of paper from his pockets. "He'll read it off this, then destroy it immediately. He's more than willing to put his life on the line in the name of duty, and Elam's already dead, so he has nothing to worry about. Now, places, everyone, places." I wanted to object, but Seneca's security guards had silently appeared and were already firmly ushering us to the threshold of the room. Woodbid was the only living person left inside, and he didn't appear to be the least bit reluctant. As uncomfortable as it made me, I didn't see any grounds for aborting the attempt. "Seneca, if this is a repeat of what happened at Triskelion Theater, I swear to God," Genevieve began. "A Wiccan's oath to the God of Abraham is hardly anything I take seriously." "My dear," he cut her off. "When you're ready, Mr. Woodbid." Woodbid bowed obsequiously and quickly began spinning the dials, entering only one number at a time as he moved from top to bottom, alternating between clockwise and counter-clockwise turns. Elam gave me a reassuring nod, then turned to lock eyes with the iron face of his forefather. One by one, the tumblers fell into place, and when Woodbead entered the last digit, we all listened eagerly to see if the lock would either open or reset. But neither happened. Instead, the eyes of Artaxerxes' crow began to glow with the chthonic aura of the underworld, and we watched in dismay as the iron face moved its bearded mouth to speak. A familiar. The hoarse old voice asked softly in disdain, "Impossible. Your soul belongs to the dread Persephone. Too many of us failed to honor the pact you made with Persephone, and our bloodline came to an end," Elam explained after only a moment of dismayed hesitation. "But in my last month of life, I befriended a witch, and she renegotiated the pact you made. Thanks to her, my daughter and any other virtuous members of our family were freed from the unjust afterlife that you had condemned us to, and I am now bound to her as her spirit familiar. But dead or not, I am still the only crow who now walks the living earth, and everything in this vault is rightfully mine, so I command you to open." "Renegotiated?" the face asked, seemingly not caring about much else of what was said. "How? What could she possibly have offered Persephone that was worth my entire bloodline?" "You," Elem replied smugly. "She found that immaculate corpse of yours you hid in the mausoleum. Persephone was not at all pleased to learn that you had made a fool of her, and happily, okay, maybe not happily, but willingly took you in exchange for our freedom. You, the real you, is finally where he belongs." The face winced, partially in anger, but also in confusion. It seemed that if Artaxerxes had anticipated this outcome, he hadn't prepared for it. If Persephone had his soul, then all was lost and nothing else mattered. "What is that thing?" Rosalind whispered. "A golem, I think," I replied. "I don't know what else it could be." "Cold iron golem," Genevieve asked skeptically. "How is that possible?" "I don't know. I'm a necromancer, not an alchemist, but Artaxerxes obviously figured out a way," I replied. "Extraordinary," Seneca said, his eyes wide with wonder as it dawned on him that the vault itself might actually be worth more than whatever was inside it. "To think this has been under my nose all these years." "Huh. Samantha," the lamb called over his shoulder. "I think it's glitching." The face seemed to be shaking now, gently vibrating the walls at a slow but steadily increasing rate. Its chthonic aura intensified while all other light seemed to vanish, tendrils of ghostly pale ectoplasm leaking from its eyes and lashing out at anything they could reach. Its mouth hung open in a faltering scream, not one of pain or fear or rage, but more simply of need. Like an infant, it instinctively knew that something was wrong, and all it knew to do in that situation was to cry louder and louder until its needs were answered. "Hey, Woodbid, reset the lock. That might put it back to sleep," I suggested. "Woodbid, you are to do no such thing. This is the closest we've ever come to opening this door," Seneca countered. "Alam, you do what you were summoned here to do, and make that door stop crying this instant." "Hey, Golem, I say again, I am now the last crow upon the living earth," Elam said firmly. "Your master forged you to serve his bloodline. So," he screamed in pain as he was ensnared in the golem's ectoplasmic tendrils, crumbling to his knees and his astral form flickering out like a waning ember. "Elam," I shouted, starting to bolt into the room before Seneca grabbed me by the shoulder. "Don't be foolish." "We don't know what that will do to you," he yelled. I appear to be unaffected, "Sir, though I do kindly request permission to make a timely retreat," Woodbid shouted. "Granted." "We need to get out of here before this whole building collapses," Seneca agreed. "Never mind about Elam. He's a ghost, he'll be fine." "You don't know that? And you don't know that Golem will stop after it's destroyed the house," I argued. "We can't just run away. We need to put a stop to this." "But Samantha, what can we do?" Genevieve asked softly as she gazed upon the enormous cold iron face in helpless horror. I thought for a moment, desperately trying to come up with anything we could bring it under control. "It's a golem. It needs orders," I said, grabbing hold of the first pen and piece of paper I could find. "With Artaxerxes claimed by Persephone, its original orders are moot. It needs new ones." "Are you daft? You can't write golemic script, especially for a golem you know nearly nothing about," Seneca objected. "I've read Artaxerxes' journals and the other tomes he left in the cemetery," I countered as I frantically scribbled away on the paper, I know a lot of what he knew, and I know a lot about how he thought. I can do this. Are those Sibylline sigils you're drawing? He asked in disbelief. It's a golem. The script needs to be in Hebrew. You said it yourself, a witch swearing by the God of Abraham isn't worth much, I replied, quickly folding up the paper. If it's sacred to me, it will still work. Samantha, what did you write? He demanded. No time, I claimed as I darted into the room. Seneca tried to come after me, but Genevieve was able to hold him back, just long enough for me to make it to the vault. The tendrils of ectoplasm were dense, but clustered enough that I could avoid them. The golem was screaming so loud now that it hurt my ears to stand so close to it. The air was vibrating so strongly that I feared that, if I simply threw the paper into its mouth, it would just be blown backwards. So instead I placed it upon its tongue as swiftly as I could. The instant I drew my hand back, the jaws snapped shut, and the screaming came to a sudden stop. Its glowing eyes locked with mine, and with a single, solemn nod I knew that it accepted the new orders it had been given. The chthonic aura dissipated, the face fell still, and the vault door slipped ajar by the tiniest of cracks. Letting out a sigh of relief, I turned to check on Ilham. He had demanifested, but I could still sense him through our bond, and I knew that he wasn't seriously hurt or banished back to the underworld. Seneca rushed straight to the door and tried to pry its mouth open, only to find that it was as if it were all one solid piece of iron. Samantha, what did you tell it to do? He demanded, looking at me as if a favorite pet had decided it liked me more than him. Essentially, I told it that since Artaxerxes had been laid to rest in Heroic Cemetery, the caretaker of that cemetery would logically be his caretaker as well, and in the absence of a living or otherwise acceptable crow, the caretaker would be who it should answer to. I admitted. That didn't conflict with any of its other scrolls, luckily, so it accepted it. And you couldn't told it to recognize the legal manager of the Krauss estate instead. Seneca demanded, angrily enough that Genevieve assumed a defensive position between him and I, do you really think that Xerxes wouldn't have explicitly told his golem to never accept you as its master? I asked rhetorically. No, I suppose not. He conceded with a defeated sigh, slowly regaining his composure. The vault is open. My end of our bargain is fulfilled. I expect you to keep yours, I said firmly. Oh, of course, he said as he took in a deep breath and straightened up to his full height. He placed a hand on the vault's handle as if to open it, but then stopped abruptly. Oh dear, this is a bit embarrassing. It seems I've had a small lapse in memory. I actually did come across the documents you were looking for while I was sorting through the filing cabinets in the study. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope of rich, dark brown paper and held it out with a polite smile as I stared at him in utter disbelief. You unbelievable bastard, I finally shouted. You had it the whole time. You made us open this damn vault for you for nothing. Genevieve screamed. Not for nothing. For this as we agreed, he replied calmly. Why should I believe you? How do I know you didn't make that yourself, or more likely ordered Woodbed to do it? I demanded. No, surely a witch of your talents would be able to tell a genuine prophecy from a humble forgery. He replied, proffering the envelope with a small flourish. I snatched it out of his hand and pulled out the folded sheets of torn, notebook paper inside, reading over the nearly illegible scrawl as quickly as I could. You lied to us. We deserve to see what's inside that vault. Genevieve yelled. I did not lie. I had an honest lapse in memory, he lied. I'm well over 200 years old, you know. These things happen. But I'm afraid our transaction is complete, and quite frankly, you two have worn out your welcome. He snapped at his security guards and whistled for them to escort us out. Evie, it's fine, I said calmly as I put the paper back into its envelope and slipped it into my satchel. We got what we came here for. Let's just go. I turned around and took her by the hand, pulling her back out into the front yard. Dude, you didn't just lie to them, you lied to her! You are going to be in so much shit for this, Rosalind told him as she chased after us, profusely apologizing as she ushered us back to the crossover. Before we stepped into the surveilled vehicle, but were well out of sight of Seneca and his goons, Elam manifested by my side and quickly leaned in to whisper something crucial into my ear. I memorized the combination Seneca wrote down, he said before vanishing back into the ether. I tried not to visibly react, but I think I did smile just a little bit. All in all, it had been a pretty productive day. It was an hour before Edgar's alarm was set to go off when a series of rapid thumps on the roof jolted him awake. He shot up from the small, hard bed, eyes shooting around the old trailer home as the bombardment continued, like the contents of a butcher's shop had been dropped on this lakeside retreat. By the time he had thrown off the dusty covers and gotten his feet on the cold floor, the barrage had stopped, leaving him in total silence save for his own breath. Then came another sound. It cut through the stillness, reminding him of the noise hot air balloons make when the fire is used to send them higher. It was there for a moment, then gone. He gave himself a few seconds to calm down before finding his clothes from yesterday and hauling them on, plus a muddy pair of boots at the door. He strung his hunting knife by the sheath through his belt as well, just in case. The dim light from outside barely lit up the windows past the worn curtains, but it was enough for him to tell that fog straddled the entire landscape just past the trailer home. He grabbed the battery-powered lantern he had brought with him, even if it wouldn't help much. Still holding it, as well as having his knife nearby, made his hands shake a little less. He opened the front door, stepping out onto the ramshackle, half-rotted front porch of the lake house. It was a steep, 1-minute walk away down a gravel path to the small lake, formed from a dammed valley and stocked with fish to try and bring in some development to this portion of Missouri. But all it had managed was a trailer park a distance away around the lake and a few old places like the one he and his extended family shared. He had been looking forward to unplugging for a few days of alone time, but apparently the weather had other plans. He groaned, his anxiety fading as he rubbed his temples. Stupid Missouri weather. Whatever had happened, the lake house had better not have been damaged. His carpentry skills were about on par with the funds. He had to get someone out here to fix this crumbling place. But it was as soon as his first step off the covered front porch that he found the issue at hand was something else entirely. Plopped right on the front step was a large, gelatinous thing, some sort of gray, squishy orb, almost like a deflated oblong balloon. He grabbed a walking stick from the porch and poked the blob, moving it off the step with a midi thud. He stepped off, spotting more of the things even as the fog closed in around him. He walked around the perimeter of the house, checking and seeing no damage, just more of those blobs littering the landscape and rolling off the roof. Each one barely the length of his hand, yet they were everywhere. What on earth could these things be? He poked another, shoving the stick further in, yet the increased pressure didn't break or rip the blob, it gave inward. He sighed. He had his cell phone, but there was no signal on this side of the lake, and he couldn't take his car around with how thick this soup was. He had a long walk ahead of him. He moved toward the road, the lake house and tree line disappearing into the fog. No noise cut through the air save for his own footsteps. What had happened to the animals? Even with him present, the forest wildlife would make their presence known. Birds chirping, squirrels scurrying across the trees, deer shuffling through the undergrowth. Instead, there was nothing but silence. He found his reason why when he started down the gravel road that circled the lake. Right in the center of the road, just past the lake house's mailbox, was a deer lying on the gravel like it had been hit by a car. It lay still, but he could see its eyes were open, lids pulled back as if encountering him was a nightmare beyond the doe's capacity to imagine. It twitched and convulsed, and as he got closer, he saw that one of those blobs lay on its back, clinging to it like a tumor. He circled around and poked at the blob, but it kept its grip on the deer. The tremble made its way back into his hands, and he found himself wishing he had a gun as well as his knife. His family had been coming out to this lake for decades, and this had never happened before. Hell, this fog had never happened. The fog had always been something in the hills south of them, rolling slopes of forests that even hunters didn't bother with as they never seemed to have any good luck. Things must have changed with all that new construction being done in the nearby town. Hadn't they altered a river or something for one of their projects? Either way, he had to keep going. The silence clung to him as much as the fog did, and for a moment he felt like he was caught in the clutches of some gigantic amoeba, a living being made of water that sought to pull him in further, until it dissolved him down to the bone. His grip tightened on both the lantern and the walking stick as he lifted his feet, each newly encountered blob like a gray, translucent landmine. He smacked them off to the side when he could, clearing a path. But many others he dared not touch. The deer had just been the first, more animals littered the road. Unfortunate critters hit in this early morning by an unwanted surprise from the sky. Turkeys, a fox, squirrels everywhere. More deer. Even the coyote he had been hearing all last night. All of them maimed and laid flat by these things. He continued his route around the lake, part of him wondering just how many had made their way down to the water, floating across it in clumps. The smell of ozone clung to everything. He wrapped a strip of cloth around his face to try and help him breathe, and by then it was just a few minutes before he saw another house. An A-frame cabin. A blue tarp just visible flapping on the roof, and an assortment of broken, down cars littering the front yard. The blobs covered everything, seeming a bit more inflated than the ones he had encountered earlier. They were almost taking on a football shape, a tapered point on one end, and the other side flat, and the sharp ozone scent seemed to be emanating from them. Unlike earlier, not a single animal lay in the forest or grass around him. He made his way up to the front door and knocked. He called out, almost shocked by how loud his voice was in the dead air. "Nem's Edgar. I'm staying at the house down the road. You got a phone?" Didn't this guy live here full time? He had to have a landline or something, maybe even a walkie-talkie that could reach the trailer park. We really got to make some calls. He reached for the door and found it unlocked, squeaking open. The wooden walls of the cabin were adorned with various taxidermy animals and an array of antlers on plaques, plus pinned up pictures of the resident holding up various fish caught in the lake. The floor was bare wood, the entire place feeling like it was still being worked on despite standing there for years. He moved through the hall, scoping out each Spartan room and finding no one. "Hello," he called out again. "Really sorry for barging in like this. Anyone home?" Nothing. He made his way to the other side of the A-frame. He took the stairs before him, emerging into an open attic space that served as a bedroom. Across from him he could see the blue tarp, forced inward by the rain of the gray blobs that had come down on it. It hung like a curtain across from him, fog spilling inside from the hole in the ceiling that had gone too long without being repaired. To the side near him was an open gun cabinet, and just inside he could see a hunting rifle. He didn't know the maker model, but it was there. A box of cartridges sat on a shelf by it in the case. He moved in, grabbing the rifle and slinging its sash over his shoulder. No one was here, and if he managed to get through this in one piece, he'd return it with a few dollars to cover any ammo he used. His body relaxed some as he felt the stock in his hands. The tarp rattled. Edgar spun around, tensing back up when he saw the shape of a person forming in the tarp. He called out. "So sorry about this, I'll give it back." He moved the rifle away from him, pointing the muzzle down at the floor. "Just you really need to know what's going on out there." No response. The figure shuffled, jerking around like a marionette. It stumbled around the tarp with all the grace of a local redneck after happy hour at his favorite bar. It lurched free of the tarp, and soon Edgar could see the man, dressed in torn jeans with a soiled white tank top. Each muscle in him looked tensed, taut like wires supporting a bridge. His eyes and mouth pulled back from his face in a frozen look of surprise. And adorning him like a colossal leech was one of those gray blobs, latched around the side of his neck. Long, gray tentacles spread away from the football-shaped sack, wrapping down the man's torso to his feet, across his arms to his hands and up his face, as if the thing was using the tendrils to make him look at something he wanted to shy away from. What the actual? Edgar lost the words. Trembling hands grabbing the box of cartridges before shoving them in a pocket and trying to open the chamber of the bolt-action rifle. "Please stay back. You just stay right there. I'll be right back with your gun and an ambulance." The man regarded him, or perhaps it was more accurate to say the blob regarded him. It made him lurch forward, and as it got closer, Edgar could see it had swollen up more, with little fins starting to form on its side. "The Miss Queen is boarding this area. said the man, a tentacle wrapped tight around his throat. The voice was dead, empty, spoken without any rhythm or meter. Are you ready to board? Mist Queen. Board. What? Edgar racked his mind at what he was hearing. Are you ready to board? The man asked again. He looked at him. You aren't ready. This man wasn't either. This will be quick. The man's hand shot down, grabbing one of the loose blobs and palming it like a baseball. As he held it, the tentacles shot out of its flat bottom like a spike trap, hanging in the air for a second before going limp. You will be ready for boarding. The man threw the blob at Edgar, who just managed to duck to the side as it flailed past him. Its tentacles went every way, thrashing about in a desperate attempt to grab him, all while the stench of ozone grew. The blob hit the wall with a thud, but instead of falling, it floated down, tentacles drooping to the floor. Edgar darted down the stairs as fast as he could, and soon he could hear the puppet of a man charging after him. He hit the ground floor and made for the outside as the man threw himself down the stairs, the controlling parasite not heeding the damage it was doing to its host. As jerking as its motions were, it moved so quickly. Edgar slung the rifle again, freeing his hand to properly grab his walking stick. He dropped the lantern and readied his weapon as the man shot upright as if lifted by strings. The man charged at him, the blob from before now held in his hand. Edgar lanced ahead, getting the man in the chest with enough force to knock him down with a loud crack. But Edgar fell back as well from the momentum. He caught himself eyeing the man ahead. His chest had caved in, but still the man launched himself back on his feet. The parasite focused on its goal, even as the man surely had to be mortally wounded. You will be ready to board the Mist Queen, said the man in that same cold, empty voice, as if uttered by a robot. Hell with this, said Edgar, dropping the stick and readying the hunting rifle. He managed to force a cartridge into the chamber and locked it tight, raising the barrel at his opponent. He did everything he could to keep his hands from shaking the barrel, trying to replicate the breathing exercises his uncle had taught him when showing him how to use a gun. The man shot forward and Edgar fired, rather than hit him straight on. His shaking had sent the bullet into the pulsating sac on his neck. The sac exploded in a fiery ball, setting part of the A-frame alight and sending the man's head flying as his decapitated body fell to the floor, the tentacles covering him falling off. Edgar's ears rang as he stumbled back, doing everything he could to calm down and get out of the burning house, having just enough thought to grab the lantern as he did. Somehow him killing a man wasn't even close to his main thought as he stumbled back out into the fog, stopping at a rusted truck to catch himself. What on earth had he just seen? This couldn't be real. Was that some sort of alien? Had an alien ship come to this lake and dropped some sort of weapon on them so it could abduct them all with ease? He could see more of the blobs around him, scattered like party balloons but inflating more and more. They lay about doing nothing, but if he had touched one of them, he shuddered. He tied the lantern to his belt, thankful he had thought to grab that. The walking stick was gone, left in the house the fire continued to consume. He wasn't about to reclaim it, and the rifle took priority. He would need it. He heard more shuffling off in the woods, and now he knew why he had not seen animals around here. The aliens must have gone to his house last, traveling around the lake dropping their puppeteer parasites. The Mist Queen. The name stuck in his mind. He recalled a story his uncle had told him about a Zeppelin, a majestic sight that had once flown across the Midwest. One of its crew had gone mad while the Mist Queen had been cruising over these hills, causing it to crash into one of the lakes further south. And since then the ghost of this Zeppelin haunted the forest, carried by the fog as it could no longer float on the air past it. Were these parasites the twisted form of its crew, seeking more passengers to carry to the afterlife? More shuffling, and just off in the fog he could see forms moving in the undergrowth that encroached on the gravel road. He saw a buck, tentacles twisting their way up its antlers. He loaded another cartridge, trying to spot where the parasite was on the animal. Ozone plagued the air. He kept moving as he heard the deer lurch forward, falling over its own limbs with even less grace than the man had been piloted. He picked up his pace, doing all he could to avoid the parasites that had yet to catch a host. Another animal stumbled out of the woods, but he kept going. He did a double take when he saw a squirrel floating through the air, carried by a much larger swollen parasite like a balloon. This one's side fins had fully formed, complete with two on the pointed back. A cavity lay between them, and a circular bulge had manifested on the front of the thing's face. Edgar would swear the parasite was pointing that bulge at him. At last he could see the rows of mobile homes up ahead, encased in a shabby wooden privacy fence. The Oak Village trailer park. He saw more small animals floating upward, disappearing into the fog and paying him no mind. Squirrels, rabbits, birds. Even a fox and bobcat. Their own parasites inflating more to support their climb up the thick air. A deer stumbled out of the woods, its parasite the size of a beach ball and still swelling. The deer looked to be shriveling up, desiccating. No time. He charged up the road, finally spotting the office for the trailer park. He barged his way inside and slammed the door shut behind him. He pushed himself against it, panting as he slid down to the floor. No lights were on inside the office. As empty and dead as the rest of the world he now lived in. Who knew how far this fog went, created by the Mist Queen so it could take on passengers. Carried this far north by the changes to the landscape affecting, where its vapors could travel. He checked the chamber of his rifle again. He had a handful of cartridges left, his lantern and his hunting knife for whatever good that would serve him. Maybe it would leave after taking enough of the wildlife and whatever poor souls that had touched one of its crew. Or perhaps they would all be ready to board. "Hey," said a voice, followed by the cocking of a gun. Edgar looked up to see a middle-aged, frumpy bald man pointing a pistol at him before lowering it. "You ain't one of those freaks. Sorry about that." "It's okay," said Edgar. Being a long more, and he pulled himself up. "Idjar." "Warren," said the man. "Veer on earth you come from?" "Boy, down the road," said Edgar. "Got any idea what's going on?" "No more than you do, I'd wager," he said. He moved over to the front desk and grabbed a water bottle, which he tossed to Edgar. "Those damn blob things plastered my entire park before the sun was up. Tried to clear them off before the dimwits running my lot started messing with them when I realized something was off. I'm sure you've seen what these things do." Edgar nodded. "So, you've been hiding in here," he said. "When's help coming?" Warren shook his head. "Don't know what these things are, but they're damn smart. One of them controlling this father and his kids dug up the line those internet people had just installed. Cell phones ain't working either. Whatever's doing this has us cut off. The Mist Queen. I heard one of them saying that before she threw one of those blobs at another woman here." Warren shuddered. "I don't know where they are right now. Last I saw they were trying to break into a house 2 lots over. 2 idiots I've been trying to evict for a while because they keep shooting off these massive fireworks after midnight." "That might be just what we need," said Edgar. "I shot one of those parasites and it exploded." Warren raised a hand to his chin, contemplating this. "Better we hide. Who knows where they are?" A window shattered somewhere in the back of the office. They both raised their guns, Edgar flicking off the safety as he took in the form shuffling out of a back room. A man, his body shriveling even as the parasite on his side swelled, contorting and breaking his spine to accommodate itself. "The Mist Queen is boarding this area," he croaked out, the dead voice hoarse. "Are you ready to board?" In his hands he held 2 more of the parasites, tentacles ready. "What'd it have to be you, Gary?" Growled Warren. "The damn Mist Queen's taking over my favorite tenants." He shot Gary's parasite without hesitation, the gray blob erupting into fire and blasting its victim to bits. "Yus were trying for that house, kid." They burst out of the burning office, Edgar's ears still ringing. What on earth was in those things that made them explode? It had to be tied to the ozone he smelled. Why the victims were shriveling up as the parasites grew bigger. The fog closed in on them, but even through it they could see people stumbling their way. Their parasites had grown almost as large as their bodies, inflating so much their victims seemed to almost float across the ground, each gentle step carrying them with ease. Edgar gulped and fired, taking out another and earning another blazing explosion that obliterated the poor host. Still the parasites sent their debilitated puppets forward, more of their ilk in hand. Swollen football, shaped orbs taking control from all manner of places. They favored the head and shoulders, but he saw them clinging everywhere they could. One floated along while dragging its puppet by the foot. Many threw parasites at them, but they managed to dodge, Warren doing so by a hair. The flames made the others shy away, and soon a path was cleared for them to charge down the park's road toward the lot Warren had pointed out. Another mobile home, nearly indistinguishable from the rest, the door broken in and the previous tenants out on the front lawn, floating upward and making their way into the fog. Others still remained, blocking their way. Edgar and Warren held back from destroying these ones. If they did, they risked catching the home afire and lighting all the fireworks. More came in behind them, but these ones did not try to attack or throw their parasites like the others. They stared at the two of them, a line of desiccated men, women and children at the complete mercy of their puppeteers, eyes almost begging them for help even as the tentacles pulled the lids back and worked their mouths and throats. "The Miss Queen is boarding this area," they called out in unison. "Are you ready to board?" "The actual crap is the Miss Queen," barked Warren, raising his gun. "I don't believe in ghosts, so you'd better have something good." The hosts stopped, jerking their heads to look at each other. "We are the Miss Queen," one said.
"What?"
Warren scratched his head. "The Miss Queen is no ghost," another said. "Each of us is the Miss Queen Da. All of us together, working as one. United to serve the whole. Each designed to unique purpose. We are ready to board. Others will board you. More will take care of you. And the rest shall carry you to the next place." They all stopped and jerked through the next place, heads upward. "The rest of us is here." Edgar felt his skin grow cold as he looked at the fog, still as obscuring and opaque as before. Then he saw something move. Giant cords tapering down from the sky, dozens of them. No, not cords, tentacles. Tentacles just like those on the parasites, elegant yet covered in rows upon rows of barbs. Had he not been trying so hard to find them, they might have almost blended into the fog. The tentacles twisted upward, and the further he craned his neck, the more he could make out an obscured, dark figure floating down. He heard the hot air balloon sound from before, and the shape moved ahead, the fog parting to reveal what now draped its tendrils across the trailer park. Its body matched that of its parasites, but yet was so much more. The finned, inflated form was lined and supported by a frame of something white like bone, containing its swollen body like a cage. Rows upon rows of pods lined the protruding bottom side. Above them he could see the inner workings of the horror through the translucent hide, pulsating organs working to power the monstrosity. Bodies of the taken floated upward toward the pods, tentacles reaching and grabbing them before the pods opened sideways for their catch to be placed inside. The parasites relinquished their host and grabbed onto the outside of the pods, fusing with the flesh and wriggling their way back into the main body, returning to the center where rows of them hung like profane fruit. The pods closed once full, their prey now fully boarded and ready to be taken care of. And at the front of the Mist Queen, the circular bulge opened. A single rose-colored eye gazed down, a long light band running across it while three slit, like pupils focused in on the two of them. "You will board the Mist Queen," said one of the hosts. She, as well as the others the Mist Queen had taken, started to float upward. "Even if you're not ready, you will board." The Mist Queen moved itself over and tentacles dropped down around them, a trap of barbed tendrils bearing their way even as they took the other people the parasites had claimed. A series of tentacles fell down toward them, shooting out of the Mist Queen's main body. "Get in the house," yelled Warren, pushing a jar ahead and out of the reach of the tentacles. "Find something, Ank." Warren's words devolved into shrieks of agony as several tentacles wrapped around him, digging their barbs into his arms, legs, torso. Soon they were dragging him up into the air to board alongside all the other people that had called this park home. Edgar managed to tear himself away from the sight and got back onto his feet, dashing past the hosts that now floated up to rejoin the rest of their kind. Edgar could almost feel that inhuman, banded eye glaring at him, somehow seeing him in so many ways he couldn't comprehend. He got to the door of the mobile home, loaded a shot, and fired it up at the Mist Queen. But if it did anything, he could see no evidence of it. The Mist Queen must have been far beyond the parts of itself, thrown on the ground to catch prey, reinforced against such paltry weapons. But if the house had something with more punch, Edgar threw himself into the home, loading another cartridge into the rifle even as his eyes shot around, looking for anything that could save him. He heard the firing sound again, and it finally clicked that this was the Mist Queen using whatever it had in its form to propel itself through the air. The windows grew darker as the horror stopped itself just over him, and he could hear wood cracking and tearing as its tentacles shut down and bombarded the roof. More tendrils blocked off the windows and open doorway, leaving him trapped and soon to be as exposed as a rabbit whose home had been dug out by a starving wolf. Finally, he caught sight of a colossal tube of the sort of young him had only imagined having the money to purchase. He moved over to it, scrambling around and eventually finding a lighter. He grabbed both and moved to the center of the home, looking around for some sort of wick he could use to light it from a distance before. The roof caved in and he could barely put up his hands in time to protect his head as the wood and debris rained on him. Then down came a tentacle, and his waist erupted into seething pain as the Mist Queen grasped him in its clutches. It felt like a burning ring of fire had closed tight around his midsection, his skin bursting into welts as the barbs dug in, his legs numbing within seconds. The Mist Queen started to retract him out of the mobile home, and it wouldn't be long before it brought him up to one of those pods to board him. The gun was gone, fallen off his shoulders from his rough climb into the air. The fireworks lay below him. Even as Edgar shrieked in pain, his hand moved on its own, scrambling for the shit at his side and popping it open. He kept his hand clear of the tentacle around his waist, just managing to pull the knife free without touching the barbs and bringing it up. He sawed at the tentacle, cutting it off and sending him back to the ground. He hit the debris, covered floor of the home, a whole new host of pain joining the tentacle that had loosened itself from his waist. He cried out again, his knife lost to the side. The Mist Queen still lay overhead. Only a matter of time before it sent down another tentacle to board him. There it was, just within reach. The tube of fireworks, spared from destruction by the falling debris. He still had the lighter. He could see the wick sticking out as if beckoning to him. "You will still board," called out a parasite's host as it floated by. Even as Edgar fought for his life, all parts of the Mist Queen still acted like he was just a small part of a normal day. He cried out in excruciation as he flipped the lighter on and set the wick ablaze. He pushed himself and rolled away, his body finally giving out from the countless wounds covering him, leaving him on his back. The fireworks went off a distance away, countless shots flying up into the sky and blanketing the Mist Queen in their multi-colored glory. Blast after blast hit its underside, searing tentacles, blasting pods and charring the hanging parasites. He could almost see the banded eye widening as the firing sound emitted again, trying to carry the floating horror away from the constant bombardment. The firing sound was soon accompanied by an eruption that dwarfed all those emitted from the hosts, and Edgar just managed to see a fiery blaze explode on one side of the Mist Queen, sending it off tilt and moving toward the ground as he descended into unconsciousness. Edgar awoke to find himself in a bed, most of his body wrapped up, and every part of him hurting like he had just been put through a trash compactor. He must be at the clinic in the town near the trailer park. A nurse entered the room and turned to him when he awoke. "Good to see you're awake," said the nurse. "You have a lot of questions right now, don't you? Just know you're safe for now, though I have someone who wants to talk to you." "Okay," said Edgar. He couldn't do anything else. He was trapped, but at least he still lived. The nurse nodded and left, soon replaced by a man in a suit. Edgar had only ever seen men like him in movies. "Hello, young man," he said. "You're quite lucky to be alive. After all, it's not every day a gas main explodes and takes out an entire trailer park, plus some of the surrounding area." "That's not..." Edgar stopped. It clicked. "I suppose I am." As if anyone would believe the truth, but surely the man across from him had to make sure Edgar didn't even try. "Well, at least it won't happen again. It's all over with, isn't it?" "We're cleaning up all the other remnants in the area," said the man. "We've picked up the mobile home park, the lake, and the burn house nearby. That one yours?" "No, the one past it," said Edgar. "At least they're all gone, right?" There were none dropped at the house past the burned one, said the man. He started, his calm expression giving way for just a second, then reached up to his ear. I'll take my leave for now. Get the nurse to call someone to get you. You won't be going back to your house for a while. Before Edgar could say anything else, he darted out the door. Edgar lay in bed, skin growing clammy even as his exhaustion caught up with him again. He faded back into sleep, but not before he glanced out the window and, in the early misty morning, almost thought he could see a small floating, translucent shape moving through the vapor. He's gone. I startle awake, elbow forcefully jamming into Chris, side as I steal him from his sleep. It was around 7 a.m. when I heard him outside his tent, pacing about on the dry leaves. The noise stopped a short while later. It is now 8:30 a.m. Any traces of Richard, his tent, or supplies have disappeared. What do you mean? Chris blinked. Groggily, he squinted as his face emerged from the sleeping bag. Richard's left, he's gone. Where the fuck is he? I start scrambling, pulling at the zips on my sleeping bag as I get into a crouching position to leave the tent. The forest floor is untouched. Any traces of Richard have been scrubbed from its memory, masked in a thick layer of auburn leaves. How long has he been gone? Can't have been more than an hour. Is he taking a piss? Chris asks dismissively. No, like he's fucking gone and left. He's taken his tent down and disappeared. I guffaw in disbelief. This startles him into a sense of alert. No, you're joking. Where's he gone? Chris' head peers over my shoulder into the clearing. He's honestly taking the piss. What the fuck's he gotten up to? I get out of the tent and into an upright position, my joints creaking as I take a few steps to examine the clearing and the nearby woods for any signs of Richard. A neat patchwork of pine trees envelops the surroundings. At certain angles I can see between the long promenades of trees, forming into straight rows to provide a narrow view of the distance. But this doesn't help much. This isn't like him. We're 12 years into these hiking trips, and not once has he ever strayed so much as a few feet from the group. We are all very much team players and rely on group consensus for any important decisions. My stomach exudes a feeling of discomfort and unease. Did he tell us he was leaving? I honestly don't remember. I clamber back into the tent and over Chris, rummaging through the rucksack until my hands grasp a cold metallic slab. I take my phone and re-enter the clearing, raising it end, point towards the sky as if offering it up to some unseen deity. No signal. I swear I had at least 2 bars last night. We set up camp here because it's the first place for miles that I received any notifications. I meant to give Jane a message to let her know we were okay. Shit, I'll have to call her when I get the chance. Chris' eyes widen and he starts moving with urgency, heading back towards the tent. He pulls out a waterproof jacket and fumbles through the pockets for his phone. I was going to show you how these worked, but I got some of those trackers a few months ago. Because of the bag and shit we lost last time, I thought we could put these on all our stuff. Chris' explanations were muddled under the weight of his intense concentration. He stares, unblinking at his phone, hands shaking slightly as he opens and closes apps until he finds the right one. I think I put 2 in Rich's bag thinking it was mine. I couldn't find them in my rucksack last night. I don't respond, as if not to break the spell of this alchemist working unearthly magic to return our friend. Here, he exclaims with some confidence, presenting me with phone screen. I see a map. Barely a map, more a large, deep green plain with very few details. But I notice some pinpoints, in 2 bunches at top and bottom of the display. Chris gestures to the bottom group. This is us, I think, and the ones up there are the ones Rich has got. He taps the screen and we zoom in on the ones we think to be Richard's. There's no way, I retort. That's 22 miles away. He's been gone a fucking hour. How did he get 22 miles away? Do we even know what direction that's in? Mate, I don't know. Chris lets out a nervous chuckle to break the tension. But it's GPS and it says 5 minutes ago. He swipes the screen to refresh. The pinpoints shuffle slightly further up the screen as the time now reads 60 seconds ago. I mean, he is a runner. Maybe he went full pelt over there. Chris smirks and looks for my validation. That's insane. I spit back, exasperated. He can't have gone that far. That's fucking ridiculous. Did someone give him a lift? I sense my mocking tone cutting at Chris, so I reel it in and collect myself. How accurate are these? Is it still tracking him? Chris doesn't respond, instead tilting the phone screen in my direction so I can verify it for myself. He's taken his shit, and he's headed off in that direction. Chris gestures through the dense thatch of trees. We plan to be out here for 3 nights, so we can get to him by this evening and head back in the morning. We'll be 8. Is he still moving? I ask. I resign myself to the premises of this situation and start prodding at the feasibility of Chris' plan. Looks like he's settled for now, Chris replies. When we get signal, we'll give him a call or something and ask him to head back towards us. He's probably lost though. How's he going to make his way back? Look, once we speak with him, we can sort this out. Unless he's gone absolutely fucking mental, we can get him to head back and meet us somewhere. It's about 9 a.m. now. We could make it by Fuish if we head off now. Without waiting for my agreement, Chris reaches for his rucksack and starts fixing it on his back. I do the same. I feel a tightness in my stomach, an unease which seeps into my bones. I think of Jane and I sweep the Skyphone signal in one last Hail Mary attempt. No luck. I follow Chris' lead and fasten my rucksack on tight. We head off into the woods in search of Richard. The forest becomes thicker as we journey forward. We are slowed by the tangle of dead branches and shallow roots. Carefully I watch where I step, and I feel a creeping pain in my neck from holding it at such an uncomfortable angle. The cacophony of bugs and insects ring just slightly louder than my tinnitus. We travel in silence for a large part of the journey. When we do speak, we focus entirely on logistics. Chris keeps his eyes fixed on the way forward, only interrupted by brief glances at his phone to ensure the path ahead is correct. We have missed our deadline by a good few hours, but Richard doesn't seem to have moved in that time. The pinpoints show his location as unchanged, with only slight shifts left and right, as if he's swaying in some drunken stupor. At least it gives us confidence that the tags are still on his person. I clench my fists as I resist the urge to scratch the bug bites covering my forearms and shins, shaking sweat from my hands. I get flashes of discomfort when I feel my clothes sticking to me and the aches and pains of having walked nearly 20 miles. The GPS and our exhaustion are the only indicators that we have made progress. The scenery remains entirely monolithic. The sun starts to set as we close in on Richard. We start calling out his name, softly at first, as if too loud a sound would anger the forest. With confidence growing and distance narrowing, we shout for him. Sweat and spittle rain from my face as the last of my energy is spent demanding his attention. No response. The night robs us of the ability to see more than a few dozen feet in front of us. So, I listen, hearing only the footsteps of Chris and myself. The insects grow louder, but so does the gentle patter of running water. As if by some break in the fabric of reality, the forest suddenly and unexpectedly ceases in front of us. We come to a large clearing, about the length of a football pitch. The forest still dominates the surroundings, lining the other side of the clearing as it stretches for countless miles further. But the clearing is wide, reaching far beyond my field of vision. The dense undergrowth has given way to soft grass, trees replaced by wild bushes no more than a foot high. A river runs through the clearing, cutting straight through the middle. The jagged rocks on the river cut ripples into the water's surface. It's jet black and viscous, harshly reflecting the moonlight off its inky surface. In front of us, the river forks and rejoins not much further down, forming an elliptical island in the middle. A large oak tree with a wide base and mighty trunk has taken root defiantly in the middle of the island alone. It stands large and squat against the backdrop of imposing pine trees, noticeably conspicuous the abrupt clearing. I grab Chris' hand to turn the phone towards me. All it shows is the same deep green forest we have spent our day conquering. No clearing, no stream, nothing. Richard's there. He's by the tree. Oh my fucking God. I feel the energy surging back into my muscles as I sprint towards the riverbank, now screaming his name, my throat burning. Chris takes only a moment to catch, and he's there running alongside me, flailing his arms as if stranded at sea. I take about 3 steps into the water before the cold hits me. Compared to the warmth of the day, the water feels icy and hostile. I flinch and retreat a few steps back towards the riverbank. I use this opportunity to get a better look at Richard. All I can make out is his silhouette, standing motionless to the left of the tree. His face is completely obscured by shadows. I can't tell if he's facing towards or away from us. The lights of our headlamps dissipate before reaching the island. Chris is continuing to shout Richard's name, punctuated by a few "what the fuck are you doings" and "how the fuck did you get theirs?" But Richard just remains, motionless, bathed in dark, as if dissolving into the vast expanse of the forest behind him. I jerk my body around to find my rucksack, laying at the edge of the clearing. I must have shed it when we started running. Chris doesn't wait, wading into the waist, high water without a second thought. He lets out a few pained grunts as the water envelops his torso and stomach. His arms right abreast the water, and he glides slowly through towards Richard. I'm not far behind him, dragging my rucksack into the water and clenching my teeth as I brace for the first few steps in. We make our way through the water as the current suddenly picks up. I see Chris balled over by the sudden force. I brace myself against the current, feeling it surging through me with a tremendous rush of power. A strap of my rucksack is tied around my hand as to not lose it, but I'm pulled off balance by the force on the bag. My head becomes submerged as I'm dragged downstream by my wrist. I dig my heels in and pull back against the force, twisting my neck round to gasp for breath. Richard is watching me from beneath the tree. After a moment, I have my head out of the water and my feet firmly planted on the ground. The current has dissipated. I examine the surroundings and find that I have only drifted a few feet off course. Chris is not too far away. The adrenaline dissipates, leaving me defenseless against the bitter cold. Wading over, I notice Chris' attention is fixed elsewhere. "Hey, where did Richard go?" Chris asks sharply between harsh draws of breath. "Did you see him? I swear he was here just now." I stop for breath and confirm for myself that yes, you're right. He's not here. He has simply disappeared like he did before. Of course he did. I don't even flinch at these embers of hope slipping through my fingers. I just focus on pulling myself towards the island. We reach the slight stretch of land, now uninhabited. My bones slowly defrost from the water, teeth chattering. I click my headlamp and I confirm no footprints, no disturbance of any kind. The river returns to a quiet trickle of water. This is fucked. Where the fuck are we? Chris panics, pulling his phone out of his pocket and shaking off water droplets. I can't feel my bloody fingers. He moans as he locks himself out. I release his phone from his grip to wipe the remaining water off on the grass and punch in his passcode. It's here. Where's the bag? I search frantically, looking for a rucksack or a coat or something scattered on the ground. The phone says the trackers are still here, even if Richard is not. Where the fuck has he gone? Chris whispers harshly for my attention, as if not to catch the attention of a nearby predator. His eyes are red and watery in the torchlight. I cannot give him any answers. That could not have been him. That was not fucking him. We're fucked. Still, I remain silent. I push that pit in my stomach deep down, back into hell. Instead, I reach for my phone and raise it aloft. Still nothing. Fuck's sake. Nothing has come through in the past day. No one knows where we are. We've only been gone a day and a half. Jane is still at the cabin and is not expecting us back until at least Monday evening. We're 22 miles off, tracking one man down. Our reputation for disappearing for days at a time has proven to be a sore irony. Right? I assert with all the authority I can muster. Let's cut our losses. Get the fuck away from here and set up camp somewhere. We'll head back as far as we can tomorrow, and if I get any phone signal, I'll call for a rescue team or something. I attempt to instill a confidence in Chris, which is not particularly well-founded. There's no signal anywhere. This place isn't even on the fucking map. Like I said, we're leaving here. We're not staying. We'll set up camp about a mile away and we should get back just all right. I spit with righteous indignation. But we can't just leave Rich. Like, we can't just leave him lost out here. He's fucking somewhere, right? Chris pleads with an uncharacteristic meekness. Well, that's his own fucking fault, isn't it? The comment lingers in the air, stinging my mouth with its vitriol. We wait in silence for a moment before I turn to head back. My torch catches the base of the tree. I turn back to illuminate the trunk, where I scan upwards towards the top, resting about head height. I stare at the carvings etched into the wood. Carefully sculpted or angular, geometric shapes, in rows running from top to bottom. I graze my fingers along them, recognizing them to be Norse runes. Up and down, they have been carefully transcribed. I rub my fingertips together, examining the deep red coating they've been gifted. The metallic smell confirms that it is blood. I examine the tree again, and the entire face of the trunk has been haphazardly smeared in the same deep red. A sense of realization washes over me. This must be why Richard brought us here. Chris shuffles over, his blind panic now subsiding into a sense of calm. I know it, these are symbols of protection. They bring fortune and good luck to those who happen upon them. Chris eyes them up and down in silence. We both breathe calmness into our lungs. I retrieve my rucksack from the river and carefully dig through it. I unsheathe the kitchen knife and bring it back to the tree. Scanning the bark for any signs of instruction, I rub more blood onto my fingers and examine it closely. It appears that the blood fixes a connection of some kind between the donor and the runes, endowing the traveler with good omens. Chris, unspeaking, presents me with his palm. I look to him for approval before firmly pressing into it and slicing through the center, just above his thumb and across his heart line. He doesn't react. I present mine to him and do the same, digging in to ensure a decent amount of blood. A sense of warmth grows from my hand, up my forearm and into my body. I inhale deeply and hold the moment in my mind. Taking his hand with mine, we press them together, squeezing them with my other hand to strengthen the bond. We both reach for the tree and smear our own deep red paint over the runes. I scan over the markings again and recognize some of them. Protection, love, good health. Yes, this is what we need. We are out here, in the apathy and brutality of wilderness. These omens will protect us from whatever is lurking. Chris is smiling with his eyes, he knows it just like I do. I reach over and caress his face, smearing a line of blood across his forehead. I turn to study the runes. One calls out to me with an aura of love, all just protection. Of course, I clutch the knife and raise it to his forehead delicately, but decisively carving the rune into his skin. He doesn't flinch, holding the same euphoric expression but now grinning ear to ear. The job only takes a moment, and once finished I wipe the drops of blood across his face and cheeks. I pass him the knife and lean forward in excited anticipation. He carves Solo's son into my forehead. Pure ecstasy. We are both overcome with awe at our good fortune. Richard has led us here to bring us out of the forests and into the light, back to our friends and family, waiting for us with open arms. I feel the ground vibrate, shifting beneath our feet. We startle and step back. The ground gives way to a hole at the base of the tree. We pause for a moment as I peer into the newly formed chasm. It has opened up a tunnel into the earth, fit for man, stretching deep into blackness, curving underneath the tree and out of sight. Chris is staring deep into me. We share an unspoken knowledge of what we must do. Chris once again presents me with his hand, face up towards the blackened sky. I rest it in mine and press the knife down into the first joint in his forefinger. It snaps with a satisfying cleanness. Chris stares at his palm with quiet solemnity. I move to the next finger and repeat the process. Crack, just as pure as the first. One by one, each finger is severed at the first joint. I coddle the severed pieces in my hand with the care of rosary beads. He leans forward, eyes closed, as I gently place one of them in his mouth. The rest are tossed down the hole with a quiet murmur of prayer. He shuts his lips tight and holds it there, savoring the sensation in deep meditation. Chris opens his eyes to take me in one final time. We share a look of knowing. His features betray the joy he is hiding. He is truly at peace. Without a sound, Chris slips into the hole beneath the tree, arms raised above his head to ease his descent. He vanishes into the abyss below without a single word. I remain on the overworld, now truly alone. I raise my hand in the same ritual fashion and bring a knife to my forefinger and begin pressing down. A pain shoots through me, not from my hand but my face. I stagger backwards and clutch my jaw with both hands, dropping the knife. Tears rush down my cheeks as my facial muscles convulse. I've been screaming for a long time. My throat is red hot, torn to shreds. I look at my hands, I look at the tree, I look at the hole. I kneel over it on all fours and scream with all the strength I can muster. Chris, I wail with a hoarseness that betrays my sheer panic. I shoot up to my feet and whip my head around to catch a sign of anything watching. The forest lies silent, scrambling with reckless urgency. I head for water and start paddling. The cold is irrelevant in the face of the pain coursing through my face and hands. I pull the water past me and clamber for the river. I don't dare turn back to face what may be waiting for me. Instead, I head back into the forest and running faster than I ever thought capable of. The wind brings me back around before the etching of my limbs sets in. I start awake, fully clothed, sprawled out at the base of a tree. Dense forest surrounds me. The sun peers through the canopy as morning sets in. Frantically patting my pockets, I feel for my phone and nothing else. The woods are silent, no insects, no footsteps, just the faint sound of wind brushing past my ears. I let a guttural, full-bodied scream for what feels like hours. Nothing. I can taste dryness in my mouth, but that discomfort pales in comparison to the ruthless beating the rest of my body is reeling from. Before my mind can begin processing it, my body starts moving. I'm pulled out of my fatigue by a primal thirst for survival. Stumbling through the forest, I push against the tree trunks to steady my balance and propel me forwards. I don't know where I'm going. Thoughts of Chris and Richard hammer at the door of my mind as uninvited guests, demanding an audience. Their images don't bring me tears, but stress. I need to help myself first, then I can help them. Licking my wounds out in the arse end of nowhere isn't going to bring a rescue party. I swipe my thumb over the jagged shards of my phone screen and enter the passcode. I open maps and hold it arm's length in front of me, squinting into the dimmed light for a glimpse of my lifeline. No signal, but GPS is working fine. Deep green smear enveloping face of the phone, no details whatsoever. Fine, whatever. I can tell north from south like a tit from an arse now. I swivel on my heels, face southeast, and keep walking. After I'm not sure how long, I find myself led to another clearing. The scenery breaks as abruptly as before, but now I'm high up on a cliffside. Probably about 100-200 feet below me is a sheer drop. An uninviting tangle of stone, and fate beckons from the base of the cliff. From there, the forest wrestles back control and sprawls endlessly in every direction beyond the horizon. Tears of stress concentrate in my eyes. Where the fuck did this come from? The forest has been nothing but a flat, uninterrupted plain for the entire trip, and now I'm standing a few hundred feet in the air. I've not seen a single hill this entire trip. What the fuck is this? I pause to collect myself and decide on the play. Like the river, the cliff face stretches for miles on each end, a fault line in the earth splitting the world into two halves. This is the way forward. The map proves aggravatingly useless, yet again at providing me with routes, or alternatives, or anything fucking helpful in the slightest. My heart jumps and I almost drop the phone down the cliffside. The vibration sends tremors up my arm and my entire body into alert. Jane is calling. I stare dumbly at the screen for a beyond reasonable length of time. No emotions penetrate the fortress of my concentration as I raise the phone to my ear. Eid, she asks sheepishly. Honey, oh my God! I am so glad to hear your voice. Relief washes over me as her voice lights a warm glow of hope. Where the fuck have you gone? Her fury is palpable. The brief flicker of hope has been extinguished and my soul hollowed out. I've been worrying non-stop for the past 3 nights. Becky is worried. The kids are worried. Is Chris with you? What the fuck were you thinking? I gasp to interrupt, but Jane only builds momentum. You left in the dead of night. 2 in the fucking morning. I called the police. They've been searching for the past 2 days. What the fuck do I tell the kids? A headache burns from my forehead as I stammer a response to stem the tide of anger and accusation. We went hiking, it wasn't Zell. No fucking shit, you went hiking, you took everything. Where have the kitchen knives gone? Becky was crying. The kids are terrified. What the fuck are you doing? My jaw hangs agape, defenseless against the pain of her scorn. I don't know, I'm sorry. But we lost Richard. He went off and we had tow. Who the fuck is Richard? She screams, her volume reaching a fever pitch. I have to pull the phone away from my ear. What the fuck are you talking about? Who is Richard? I start to feel faint and stagger backwards, clutching at my stomach as I resist the urge to throw up. He came with us on the trip and we lost him and we went to find him, but Chris. I breathlessly scramble for an explanation. What? Who is this? How the fuck did you end up in the middle of the forest with some random stranger? Where is Chris? Is he with you? No, he's gone, Jane screams in complete hysteria. What do you mean he's gone? What's happening? And my hands are trembling and my mind is vacant. We man Chris and Richard, we were camping, and the we were looking for, he got lost in the woods, so we started looking because the phone just please. My voice trails off as I hear sobbing down the other end of the phone. Jane's anger has subsided into meek, desperate pleading for answers. Eid, where are you? Can you tell me where you are? We're lost, I'm lost. I don't know where Chris is. At this point, I am spent. All I need is the confirmation of my worst suspicions. Me. Richard and Chris left on Friday afternoon and walked about 10 miles into the forest and set up camp. I enunciate each of the details for my own sake as much as hers. It feels like a lie told to myself over and over until I'm convinced it's truth. Ed, you're really scaring me. Who is Richard? We don't know a Richard. We're in the middle of nowhere. How did you meet him? I fall silent at the weight of this question. I hang up, message my location, and put the phone down. I'm lost. Truly and definitively lost. For how long now I do not know. The tethers of reality I clung to have only served to drag me further in. I sit in silt and mud, reeling in the weight of the conversation. I've been lost for a long while. How many of us were there? How many of us were there ever on these trips? Was it 3 or just 2 or 4 or 7.5? Could there have been loads of us in a naked orgy for all I know? Or was I just wonking myself off in the wilderness for a long weekend? Richard and I were groomsmen for Chris and Becky's wedding. We were at university together. He had been out with us every fucking year since we started hiking. What the fuck was she on about? I sit with these thoughts for a while and come to no conclusions. Hugging my knees to my chest, the stress boils over into floods of tears. I wipe my face, gaze at the beauty of the forest. From this vantage point, the true might of nature is at full display. Shades of green and black stand defiantly against the amber and gold of the setting sun. A perfect balance of all life, endless space, and creation. From here I am gliding over it, stealing a view reserved only for the birds and the gods. I drift through the next few hours like a ghost amongst the living. The sun has long since set, and seeing anything more than a few feet away is impossible now. Not that it matters really. I tread, arms outstretched, stumbling through the overgrowth, feeling my way through the trees. There's nothing left but to move. Even the wind has ceased caressing my ears with its soft whistling. The silence engulfs me in its firm embrace. Keep going. I tread aimlessly through the forest with only the faintest memory or care for directions. Keep going. Go on, lad. Keep moving. That's it. Steady on. You're almost there. You're on the way home, lad. I can feel it in the distance. You're doing it. You're go, my God. You're going to get home. Bravo, my son. Keep pushing. Keep you signed. Your ALMST. TR. Yobi or ALMNS Fefuka R. Yoyuihiar. I see a gentle light through the trees. A red hue bathes the far side of the trees in long streaks of overgrowth. Like a moth, I single-mindedly fall towards it, transfixed. It grows brighter, but I don't squint. In the forest, nestled in a small clearing, no more than a few meters wide, is Richard's tent. The soft torque light glows from inside, dyed a warm red by its canvas walls, illuminating in all directions the blackness of the forest. It sits peacefully amongst the trees, a promise of comfort in a hostile world. Home. I glide towards the tent, my feet no longer burdened by the traps and snares of the forest floor. My hand strokes the canvas, dispensing fragments of dried blood along its side. I inhale the warmth into my lungs. Crouching down, I reach around the left hand side of the tent and gently tug on the zipper. It softly purrs as I trace the semicircle of the opening. The canvas door falls away and grants me entry. Everything in here is Richard's, neatly folded and arranged around the floor of the tent. LED lights emit a soft glow, twisted around the tent poles and suspended in the air like fireflies. Richard's books and glasses sit patiently to the right of the tent, next to a flask of coffee and a cigarette. This is a man whom I understand with all my being. 2 sleeping bags lay neatly in the center. Chris is there, sleeping soundly on the floor. A soft happiness fills my body. Chris' chest isn't rising, but he looks peaceful. His eyes are closed, and a satisfied grin decorates his face. I lean closer towards him. He smells wonderful. His hands feel cold to the touch as I rub the stubs of his fingers. Facing away, I lay down next to him, curling into a slight fetal position to allow him to spoon my body. I snuggle my back into his chest as to warm him with my life. Footsteps, emerging from the forest, move towards the tent, and a shadow appears against the canvas. It stretches high up the walls, either impossibly large or uncomfortably close. It begins circling us, with the crackling of dry leaves announcing every step. The shadow is joined by a second, entering into the parade around the tent. They clap and click in quiet rhythm. Slow and soft at first, the sound swells with confidence as another pair of hands join the ensemble. The shadows are accompanied by yet another, which begins murmuring under its breath, clicking in counterpoint to the rest. I lay there in Chris' embrace, watching in quiet contemplation as the performance unfolds. This rhythmic cacophony grows as drums claps, snaps, shouts, and jeers form a rich tapestry of celebration outside. The shuffling of feet creates viscous white noise as at least a dozen bodies circle the tent. They all chant in unison a song, an ancient song. It spins me into a psychedelic ecstasy as I mouth the words along with them, failing to produce any sound. I lie there, unblinking, as a pool of spit forms on the ground beneath my mouth. Chris reaches over to my shoulder and wraps his arm around me. I warm his flesh with my love for all things. My eyes close as I become one with this moment. The tent unzips and I feel something pulling at the floor. It steps inside and I am greeted with warm understanding throughout my body. Saying nothing, seeing nothing, I know it is Richard. My chest raises unevenly as I draw breath with excitement. He lays down in front of me and I hold him trembling the same way Chris is holding me. From the way he feels, I can tell he is longer, but I don't open my eyes. The crowd grows louder in frenetic jubilation. I feel the heat emanating from Richard and his moisture coats my face, hands, and clothes. We lay here together, in the center of this world. This is truly the home I was seeking. I need no sound, no sight, no feeling. Just the knowledge that I will be held here in this space, entwined in the friendship of my greatest companions. Forever. Colt was only 13 years old when he rode as fast as he could away from Benji and Caleb, the most menacing boys in Troop Zeba 172. It was the dead of night, and only the faint orange moonlight lit the narrow path for Colt's tiny canoe, which was starting to overflow. Benji and Caleb, whose kayak was much bigger and rowing skills were far superior, were gaining on him, shouting from less than 50 away. "Give up, fee God." Benji hollered, his ugly words bouncing off the tide. "Just give up." Caleb followed, his voice slightly straining. When Colt was sure he reached the center of Gardner Lake, he stopped rowing and let go of his oars, raising both hands in the air. The kayak approached, practically bumping the canoe, and the boys laughed maniacally. Clad in camo shorts, Benji tossed a can of Miller Lite at Colt, which he dodged easily. Caleb bit his lip as Colt crossed his arms, waiting for whatever the boys had in store. "I should kill you right here." Benji spat into the water, clenching his fists. "I will slice you like the fruit you are." Colt sighed as Benji drew a pocket knife from his shorts. He was ready for this confrontation, even though he had no idea how to fight. Since last summer, Colt had been running from the rumors, running from all the ugly words about him being different and better off dead. He was done running from the truth. "So do it," Colt said coldly. "Slice me like the fruit I am. The thing is, you have to slice Caleb after you're done with me." "Colt, don't," Caleb uttered. His lost blue eyes locked helplessly on his. Before they could move, they heard a sound from underneath the water, an odd sound that stopped them in their tracks. It sounded like music from a piano, an old piano like the one that sat in his grandparents' living room. The notes sounded tinny and creaky like they belonged in an old saloon. "What the hell is that?" Benji snapped, as the notes grew increasingly louder. "It sounds like Swaney River," Caleb murmured. As Benji shot him a wide-eyed glance, mouthing the words, "What the fuck?" he quickly corrected himself. "Or something I don't know." The tinny, creaky notes grew increasingly louder. The waves collapsed within themselves like water at the edge of a fall, cascading down into a dark abyss. They desperately tried to paddle backward, but the violent current sucked them down into the abyss. Colt couldn't scream as his lungs started to fill with water. He held his breath, attempting to swim to the surface, but the downward current proved much too strong. Benji and Caleb must have sunk far beneath him, as he could only see the lake's murky water from all directions. Just when Colt thought he couldn't sink any deeper, his body smacked something hollow. For a moment, everything went dark. When Colt opened his eyes, he found his body strewn out on an oak staircase, water rapidly entering his airways. He willed himself to hold his breath for just a little bit longer as pieces of a brick or cavity wall penetrated the stairs above him. How long could he realistically hold his breath? Last summer, his older sister Nikki timed him for 2 minutes and complimented his lung capacity, or maybe it was 90 seconds. He wasn't sure and wasn't about to find out. Colt mustered the strength to propel his body upward. His entire body ached as he squeezed his arms behind his ears and pointed his feet together, kicking them like a dolphin's fin. Years later, he would be grateful for being the only kid in his friend group to make it to advanced level swim lessons. As Colt began to kick, he saw a shadow looming on the cavity wall, slowly creeping into focus. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a young boy floating in the entryway. He could only discern the boy's blonde hair and short stature. Turning his head, he realized the image of the boy belonged to a large portrait, decaying on the wall of the house. Something was wrong, though, terribly wrong. As Colt propelled his body toward the surface, the cavity walls still surrounded him. The oak staircase stretched longer than it first appeared, now winding into the depths of the waters. The walls were lined with black and white portraits of men, women, and children. The portraits numbered in the dozens, several dozens even. Their faces were warped and pixelated. Some of their faces were devoid of expression altogether. Colt knew he was inside an old colonial house, but why was it underneath the water? Why did it seem so massive? Before he could comprehend these questions, the never-ending wall of portraits sank rapidly beneath him along with the winding staircase. He grew dizzy watching the walls zoom past him and the stairs twist into a dark oblivion. He couldn't help but notice the faces in those warped and pixelated portraits were now visible but looked like decomposing corpses. Nauseous and losing consciousness, Colt swam as rapidly as he could to the surface. Only mere seconds passed before he popped his head above the water, taking long, gasping breaths. He heard voices, but the voices were muffled as he struggled to breathe normally. Something was wrong again. Benji and Caleb were back in their kayaks and looked completely dry. There was another boat next to theirs, Scoutmaster Jeff's black and white motorized fishing boat. From their boats, the three of them stared at Colt, not in a menacing way, but with looks of genuine concern. Scoutmaster Jeff extended his long, hairy arm and pulled Colt into the boat. There was something about the Scoutmaster's smile that felt to Colt, especially at this moment when his look of concern changed to a warm glance with a sparkly white smile. Everyone else was charmed by this blonde-haired, blue-eyed man of God, but he saw it for what it was. My goodness, Colt. Scoutmaster Jeff exclaimed, throwing a towel around him and helping him onto the vinyl passenger bench. We were so worried about you. What? Yeah, man, Benji said, still with suspiciously watery eyes. When you came out here on your own, we were so worried. Wait, what? You guys chased me out here. Colt struggled to find his wording as they stared at him. Caleb and Benji climbed from their boat to the Scoutmasters and put an arm around Colt's shoulder, forcing a seat next to him. What the hell? Don't touch me. That's no way to talk to friends. Scoutmaster Jeff shook his head and sighed. I know that you've been through a lot, but these boys saved your life. What were you doing out here? They were chasing me, he said even softer. And you guys were with me. We were all sinking. How are you still dirt? Whoa, Caleb said, throwing his hands up. The only reason it looked like we were chasing you is because you took off in the middle of the night. Yeah, dude, Benji chimed in. By the time we got here, you dove into the water. It's a good thing they came back and told me, the Scoutmaster said, placing a third unwanted hand on him. You were out here for a long time. We split up to search for you. What were you looking for? What the actual fuck? Colt mumbled. You guys were drowning with me, and then you were gone. I was in this old house and... The threesome stared at him with deep puzzlement. Colt wanted to shout or throw punches at them, but something held him back. He knew it wouldn't be any good. Scoutmaster Jeff laughed heartily. Okay, I think I know why you came out here. Benji, Caleb, I'm not sure if you know this legend. But Colt can tell you about the sinking house. The what? Don't be modest now. Colt, you're a real history buff like me. See, boys, sometime in the late 1800s, a family tried to push their house across the lake when it froze over during the winter. It sounds crazy, but they thought they could do it and had the townspeople help push the house on skis. It was a monumental task, of course, so the family in town took a day's break. The next day, the house started sinking. What? Colt said again in absolute bewilderment. I guess that makes sense now. I mean, I saw the staircase and portraits and Colt's words faded in another hearty laugh from the scoutmaster. You have an active imagination. The house sank over 100 years ago. Even when I was a boy, divers had taken most of the valuables from the house. You wouldn't have seen any portraits. What? But I did, and I heard piano music. This time, all three of them laughed heartily. Scoutmaster Jeff patted his back once more, which caused Colt to squirm. Looks like someone's bought this particular legend hook, line, and sinker. As the threesome droned on about the odd legend, Colt heard the tinny, creaky notes from beneath the waves. Colt shivered and Caleb bit his lip. They exchanged glances for a quick second. Colt furrowed his brow, which caused Caleb to gulp before turning back to the scoutmaster. After the conversation ended, Colt and Benji climbed back into their boat, which the scoutmaster had tethered by rope to his. He tethered Colt's too, which had a small hole in the stern. For the first few minutes, as the boats glided across the waves, the lake sounded peaceful. When they neared the shore, however, the notes of Swaney River played again, this time increasing in volume. The scoutmaster and Benji were blissfully unaware of that awful song. Then again, maybe they were being purposely deceptive. He was too tired to tell, but knew that Caleb heard the notes when he caught sight of his trembling lower lip. After they reached the shore, Scoutmaster Jeff and the boys moored their boats to the wooden dock and attempted to lure Colt back to the campground. Colt insisted he needed some time alone. Reluctantly, they headed back to the site, which was still lively with activity. Colt stayed on the dock, admiring the orange moonlight and the way it illuminated the lake. He would often sneak out to the docks when the boys told campfire stories or played pranks on each other. On any other night, he would have felt at peace. Tonight, he couldn't help waiting in nervous anticipation for the eerie piano music to return. Tonight, he couldn't help waiting for Benji and Caleb to get him when he least expected it. On the other hand, they might just keep up the charade of claiming Colt dreamt of being chased, just like he dreamt of the sinking house. Hey, Bud. Colt groaned as he heard his tent mate Jordan step onto the dock. Are you coming back to camp soon? Colt shook his head. No, Jordan, just leave me alone. Oh, I just came out here to see how you're doing. Colt turned around, groaning more audibly as he saw the only scout considered weirder than him dressed in an oversized X-Files t-shirt and torn sweatpants decked in little alien heads. We both know why you're out here. You heard them talk about the sinking house and how crazy I am. I don't think you're crazy. Of course you don't. Colt sighed and took a seat on the edge of the dock. No offense, Jordan, but you're the last person I want to talk to about this right now. It's not like you have anyone else to talk to, Jordan replied, taking a seat next to him. Why were you out here anyway? Colt composed himself with a single deep breath. You can't tell anyone, Jordan. I mean it. Well, he nodded. Benji saw Caleb and me walking together the other night. Caleb got nervous and told Benji I was stalking him, which is not true. Anyway, they chased me and I took a kayak to get away from them. That wasn't a good idea because they're better kayakers than I am. And then, Colt looked up to see if Jordan was still listening, which he truly appreciated. The other scouts would have made fun of his lisp by now, or told Colt he deserved it. And then we heard this weird piano music and started drowning. I know it sounds crazy, but it was like we were sucked down a vacuum or portal or something. I ended up in this sunken house. It had a staircase and creepy portraits. I know it sounds unbelievable, but... You found the sunken house of Gardner Lake, Jordan exclaimed.
You would know the legend. I do. I can't believe you found it. Holy shit.
Do. Colt smiled faintly as Jordan went on about how he researched the house on this website called The Shadowlands and always wanted to find the house. Well, They don't believe me either, but then they're full of it. Everyone knows about the legend, and if they deny it, they're lying to themselves. I guess so. All right, Jordan said, sighing and looking over his shoulder. I'll tell you something too if you promise not to tell anyone. Okay. Last night, I saw a scout I didn't recognize. He was standing on the docks where we are now. He wore this old school scout uniform, a khaki green shirt, and pants like my dad had in the 70s. He said his name was, well, I forgot what it was exactly, but he was looking for our scoutmaster. I woke up the scoutmaster to find him. By the time we got there, he disappeared. You're saying you saw a ghost, though. All I know is, there's a lot of strange stuff out here. How did he react? Colt laughed as Jordan made his best impression of Scoutmaster Jeff, bulging his muscles. Listen to me, Geordie boy. I am your scoutmaster. You must be a manly man like me and not believe in any ghost stories. He doesn't sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He might as well with his fake macho attitude. But the boys joked and made impressions of Scoutmaster Jeff, and the other campers held they drifted off to sleep. Colt had fallen asleep on the dock before, but tonight was different. Jordan knew he was weird and didn't care. Colt envied Jordan's carefree attitude and lack of humility. The dull sounds of crickets and waves lulled them to a deep slumber. A few hours before sunrise, Colt heard the tinny, creaky notes from beneath the waves again. The notes no longer resembled Swaney River, but a much older song, one he didn't recognize. It sounded classical like Beethoven or Bach. Those were the only names Colt could recall from the short summer he took piano lessons. Jordan, wake up. Colt nudged him a few times until he gasped. Jesus, dude, what is it? Do you hear that? Jordan stretched his arms and then all of a sudden sprang to his feet. Holy shit, dude. Where is that piano music coming from? You can hear it. Of course I can. Hey, Scoutmaster Jeff's boat is gone. With each passing note, the boys paced back and forth on the dock, wondering what to do. Colt checked the time, 3:00 a.m. Why would the Scoutmaster take his boat out this early? Where were the notes coming from, and why were they so loud and unnerving? He had only a moment to contemplate these questions before his thoughts were interrupted by muffled screams. Who the hell is that?
Who's out? I.
Colt clasped Jordan's mouth as the muffled screams continued. The screams conjoined with the tinny, creaky notes paralyzed them in fear. Jordan gestured for Colt to jump into the kayak. Unwittingly, Colt followed. As they paddled deeper into the lake, they could no longer make out the screams or notes. Only the faint sound of the tide and a gust of wind remained. Oh my God. Colt could barely believe his eyes as he saw Scoutmaster Jeff's black and white motorized fishing boat several yards away from them. Though the boat was eclipsed by darkness, he could make out the silhouette of Scoutmaster Jeff and another smaller figure. Is that who I? Colt nodded slowly. Before they could say anything more, the boat sped off into the distance. Colt and Jordan were stunned. For the rest of their stay at Gardner Lake, the boys barely spoke to each other. But as the months passed, Colt knew something about Scoutmaster Jeff was off. And something awful happened in the middle of Gardner Lake, and it wasn't the piano or house. When he tried to convince Jordan that they should tell someone, he insisted that all the boys were accounted for and that they had no proof. The boy who needed no proof to believe in aliens, Bigfoot, and even the Chupacabra suddenly decided to be reasonable about this one moment in time. When the months turned into years, Colt stopped going to scouts while Jordan stayed. He wanted nothing more to do with Troop 172. He didn't want to be friends with someone who only acted eccentric and outspoken when it suited his interests. Several years after Colt graduated from college, he could hardly believe that Sasha, one of his best friends, started dating Jordan. Sasha was an intelligent girl, working on her master's degree in biology. Jordan unsurprisingly dropped out of the Connecticut School of Broadcasting to become a professional YouTuber. Needless to say, his endeavors weren't successful. Colt and Jade, his other best friend, lived in a small house on the outskirts of Winsted. To his chagrin, Sasha and Jordan often stopped by the house together. Colt tried to make himself scarce when he was around. On one dreary December afternoon, he found this impossible to do. Colt, come here, Jade called from the living room. He was napping late in the afternoon and awoke disoriented as she called a second time. Colt, get up. We're going to be late. Jade, Sasha. And Jordan playfully snickered as he wandered into the room. He stared blankly at them for a few moments. Sasha and Jade in their long sleeve. Satin dresses and Jordan dressed head to tone a taupe suit with a wool jacket. Jade and Sasha fidgeted with their purses while Jordan adjusted his cufflinks. You seriously forgot, Sasha giggled. Jordan played with her hair until she smacked his hand away. Hun, we're going to Samantha's wedding today. You were sleeping all day, Jade said. You were talking really loudly in your sleep and said you never knew why. I don't remember that, and isn't she more of your friend Sash? Yes, but... And Jade, weren't you going with McGuel? She shook her head. He canceled at the last minute. He wasn't feeling well, so now you're my plus one. You're kidding. I don't blame him. He's been through a lot these past few months. So have you. Sorry I didn't mean to. She sighed. Don't worry about it. And I have, but I'm ready to get my mind off things. It will be fun, I hope. Where is it? Colt asked, rubbing his eyes. It's at the Viridian. Sasha perked up as she said the name. It's a really adorable rustic venue on Gardner Lake. Colt and Jordan exchanged wide-eyed glances, chomping their lips. The girls didn't seem to notice as they gushed about the charm of the venue. Jordan missed several hints from Sasha as he checked something on his phone. Wait, Jordan spoke hushedly, his eyes still locked on his screen. Is this the same Samantha who was just engaged to a different guy last year? It was a few years ago, Jordan. Sasha groaned and nudged him. She's been with this nice guy named Caleb for the past couple of years. Colt and Jordan exchanged the same glances, even more wide-eyed this time. Saunders, Colt uttered. Caleb Saunders. How did you know? They said in almost unison. We went to Boy Scouts with him. Jordan looked up from his screen and exhaled deeply. He's kind of an asshole. Jordan, no. For once, Jordan's right. He and his best friend Benji used to pick on us when we were little. That sucks, hun, Jade said, slinging an arm around his shoulder. The kids are the absolute worst, but at 15 years... Almost. People change. Let's go. Guys. Sasha tugged Jordan toward the door. What's wrong, Colt? Nothing. You sure? I gotta get changed into something nicer and we'll go. Give me like 3 minutes. Guys. They laughed as if they had forgotten about Colt in his t-shirt and sweatpants. In his bedroom, Colt discovered the wedding invitation Jade dropped on his bureau. Caleb looked the same, only somehow blonder and more unhappy than he remembered him, as he stokily held a gleaming Samantha in front of a rose garden. The last time Colt saw him happy, they were 12 and holding each other in Caleb's bedroom, genuinely enjoying each other's company. Caleb's father hosted scout meetings, which often led to the boys sneaking off while the other parents and kids engaged in some menial activity. The boys had been best friends since elementary school and even took piano lessons together. Swaney River was one of the first songs they learned on the piano. The closer they grew, the angrier his father became. He never found out anything they did, but his suspicions were enough for him to send Caleb on some kind of religious summer retreat with Scoutmaster Jeff and a few other scouts from his camp. By the time Colt inquired about the trip, Caleb had already left. When Caleb returned, he barely acknowledged Colt's existence other than to mock him and Jordan with Benji. Colt traced his fingers over Caleb's stoic face before heading out into the bitter, winter evening. It's a little less than an hour and a half from here, Jordan said as he started his clunky Chevrolet. Colt and Jade squeezed into the back seat around boxes of clutter and discarded cans of soda. Excuse the mess, guys. Don't worry about it, Jade said, swatting some cans onto the floor. After a while, Jade noticed how unusually quiet the guys were. This guy must have been awful to you, huh? Jade, Sasha exclaimed as Jordan nodded straight forward. I thought we said that people change. You said that, and Jordan was still unusually quiet. People like Caleb and Benji don't change. They made our lives miserable every chance they got. Sasha sighed. Really? I'm sorry, guys. He seemed so nice when I met him and Sam for brunch a few months ago. What did he do? He chased me, Colt said softly. They chased me by boat into the middle of Gardner Lake, saying they were going to kill me. Tell them the other part, Jordan said hoarsely. "They won't believe me. They won't believe me. They'll believe you." Colt. He stared blankly out the window before his name was said a few more times. "Yeah, sorry. It's hard to think about. They said they were going to slice me like the fruit I am, and we were pulled under by this weird rip current. I sank deep into the water and saw this house." "Sorry," Jordan chimed in, perking up a bit. "Sometime in the 1800s, these people tried to push a house across the lake when it froze over in the winter. The house sank. Some say it was haunted. We even heard piano music coming from the lake. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, the house was really old and had these strange photographs. When I came to the surface, I saw my scoutmaster with Benji and Caleb. The two denied they ever chased me. They denied being pulled underwater. The whole thing was weird. The rest of the summer, they taunted us mercilessly," Jordan said, clenching a fist. "They taunted Colt for seeing the house, and us for hearing the music on the lake. They accused Colt and me of being together and spray painted Faggy outside of our tent. I kicked both of their asses for that." "I don't remember that," Colt said faintly. "Beyond the morning, they spotted the scoutmaster's boat. The remainder of the summer was a blur. Perhaps he was so angry at Jordan for not wanting to say anything that he forgot the rest. I quit scouting shortly after, but Jordan's right. They didn't change. They were assholes in high school, too. I couldn't be out because of guys like them. Luckily, only they thought they were cool," Jordan said. "Being a scout in high school isn't the popular thing to do. Trust me, I would know. I wouldn't be surprised if that Ashol Benji is the best man. He is..." Sasha was surfing her phone, thumbs shaking. "Benji's the best man, and who did you say the name of your scoutmaster was?" "I didn't." Jordan turned onto the interstate highway, struggling to keep his old Chevrolet steady in the wintry mix. "Scoutmaster Jeff. He was a well-liked religious do-gooder, but I saw straight through it. He's the officiating pastor," Sasha uttered. "I'm sorry, guys. I totally didn't know. We can leave as soon as it's over." "That's probably for the best," Jade stated firmly. "Had no idea when I met him, either." "Yay." Colt kept his eyes fixed on the road. "We can use travel or something as an excuse." "Well, wait a minute," Jordan said. "Maybe I could capture some footage of the lake from my YouTube channel." "Don't even..." Jordan. Sasha put a hand on his leg. "I thought you were giving that up." Jordan ignored that remark and fidgeted with the dials on the radio. "I'm sick of listening to my playlist." "So are we." Jade laughed. "There's only so much rockabilly we can take." "That's weird. I only seem to be getting one channel out here, 96.1. Hey, it's playing this old-timey music. Really old-timey music." The three of them simultaneously groaned as Jordan turned up the volume and snapped his fingers to the tune of the ragtime piano music. The channel was a bit static-filled, so he turned the dial a bit more carefully. For the next half hour, he annoyed them with this station and imitated a ragtime performer with a transatlantic accent. They pretended to ignore Jordan by being on their phones or talking over the music. When Sasha was sick of pretending, she shouted for him, "Shut the hell up." This bit went on until tinny, creaky notes from an old piano blasted through the car's speakers. "What is this crap? Can we change this?" Jade nudged the back of Jordan's seat. "I think I recognize this from an old movie," Sasha remarked. "It's still awful, though." "That's Swaney River," Colt murmured. Those awful notes were unmistakable. It wasn't the upbeat version he learned in piano lessons, but the slow, droning one he heard on Gardner Lake all those years ago. Typically, when he heard an audio version of the song, an old-fashioned crooner accompanied those notes with additional instrumentals. This version sounded like it was produced in a saloon or from the grand piano in his late grandparents' dining room. The four of them stayed silent as the song's volume and droning melody increased. "That's the same song we heard on the lake that day." Jordan quickly switched the radio back to Bluetooth mode and sighed with relief as a song from his rockabilly playlist came on. "We're not far out, guys. Let's just talk." "Serves you right," Sasha said, slapping his knee. Jordan and Colt's stoic expressions caused Sasha to instantly regret her actions. "I don't know what's going on with you guys, but I don't know how to help. What happened to you was messed up, and I'm sorry. All I can say is if we stick together tonight, maybe it won't be as bad. But the three of them agreed to this pact. The closer Jordan drove to the rustic, lakeside venue, the louder the song's notes rattled through Colt's mind. Even after they parked in the snow, sprinkled lot, and stepped out into the frigid night, he could only hear the notes playing on repeat. He wasn't sure if the notes were in his head or from the distant lake. Burrowing his hands in his jacket, Jordan seemed unbothered and unable to hear the notes. He and Sasha linked arms and scurried past some guests to the main entrance. Jade grabbed Colt's arm, which somehow caused the music to cease entirely. You'll be okay, and if it sucks, you have plenty of relatives who can die. Colt chuckled. We're not in college anymore. My old Aunt Lucy can't die and get us out of a history test again. We not. If it sucks, your favorite aunt can have a heart attack or something. Jade and Colt about this and other college shenanigans as they made their way inside the lobby for cocktail hour. They marveled at the massive, tinseled Christmas tree that scraped the wooden beams. Jade remarked how lovely the stone, accented walls were along with linen, covered cocktail tables. When Jordan and Sasha sauntered over, the girls split off to socialize with Samantha's friends, leaving the guys to scan the room for any familiar faces. Cranberry and goat cheese baguettes. A tuxedoed waiter asked at their side. Colt shook his head while Jordan grabbed a fistful from the tray. What's budget? Swallow. Sorry. That's Benji by the tree. He's talking to, oh man, that's Scoutmaster Jeff. Benji wore the same blue streaked. Spiky hair people knew him for in high school, while the Scoutmaster looked just as smug and well. Dressed as Colt remembered him, sporting a crew cut and navy suit. Colt and Jordan watched the men reminisce with former scouts and clink glasses together. Something about their happiness made Colt nauseous. Maybe it was Benji's pompous laugh, or the way the Scoutmaster touched all the men tenderly as he spoke. It's like they don't remember, or don't want to. Jordan, don't you remember the morning we went on the kayak? You know, the same morning we heard screams from his boat. Jordan nodded. Why didn't you say anything? I don't know. Maybe I was too scared. Who knows how many? Sorry, Colt willed himself to stop, exhaling deeply. The bulbs from the Christmas tree started to flicker. They flickered bulb by bulb, first in columns, then circling the tree the way a snake circles and encloses its prey. Colt grabbed Jordan's arm as the bulbs started to burst. No other soul seemed to notice as glass burst onto the floor. Benji and the Scoutmaster laughed heartily with the others, unbothered by the glass raining upon their heads. They couldn't scream. They couldn't move. Colt rapidly blinked, hoping his eyes deceived him. But when he locked eyes with the group again, the men looked like teenage boys, wearing their tan shirts and long green shorts. The Scoutmaster remained his current age, caressing each boy's back. Jordan, are you seeing this? Jordan, what the hell's going on? I have no idea. But before they could say anything more, the glass from the chandelier burst into thousands of pieces. Jordan and Colt were unable to avoid the shards that pierced their shoulders. The 100 other guests carried on, as if the glass wasn't falling into their food and drinks. Jordan yelped as a shard sliced the top of his ear. He cupped his ear, but blood trickled through his fingertips. Colt reached to help, but then hit the floor as 2 more chandeliers exploded, along with the last lingering light in the room. In the darkness, Colt saw the faint flicker of a flashlight. The light illuminated the faces of a dozen boys, all different ages, bringing their forefingers to the brim of their hats. Some of the boys wore the older uniforms Colt only saw in photographs, sporting 5-button, choke-collar coats and canvas leggings. Their faces looked older too, with stoic expressions and oil, slicked hair sticking out of their caps. In unison, the boys recited the coda. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, help other people at all times, keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. Despite standing right in front of him, the boys' voices were hollow and grainy. They sounded as if they were recorded on a wax cylinder, gramophone, or an even older device. The boys repeated the oath once more, their words billowing in the darkness. The words, help other people at all times, caused Colt to tremble as the light shined on the Scoutmaster's equally stoic expression. Guys, Are you okay? Hello. As two fingers snapped, Colt and Jordan regained a sense of their surroundings. The lobby returned to its former glory with all the lights, tree bulbs, glass, and even Jordan's ear intact. They brushed themselves off, anxiously checking their surroundings. It took several seconds for them to gather their composure and move into the reception room with the other guests. What the hell was that? Jade asked. I don't know. By the time they began to comprehend the preceding events, the guests were seated in the reception wall, which was filled to the brim with beautifully hand-carved wooden chairs. Sasha and Jade gawked at the elegant white runner in the rose-covered altar while Colt and Jordan scanned the crowd for anyone who looked the slightest bit unusual or out of place. When they were sure that their minds were cohesive, the reception commenced. For some reason, Colt felt an overwhelming sense of drowsiness when Scoutmaster Jeff took his place by the altar. He could barely keep his eyes open when Caleb walked down the aisle. Unlike his invitation picture, he seemed full of life with his raised cheeks and a wide smile. He met Colt's gaze for only a moment before his eyes darted elsewhere. As the groomsmen and bridesmaids took their positions, Colt's head nodded up and down, his muscle tone decreasing. Thoughts draining to inconsequential images of a teenage Jordan and Colt playing cards in the tent, Jordan entering another tent, Caleb standing alone in the docks, and Benji drinking a can of beer. As Caleb and Samantha were pronounced husband and wife, these images drained to darkness. Colt knew he wasn't sleeping, however, as his body led him to the dining area of the hall where the four of them were seated at a table of 8. That was beautiful, Sasha said, a bit teary-eyed. I meant the ceremony, of course. It was quite a good ceremony. Jordan yawned. I'm not into all that religious stuff, but their vows were beautiful. I agree. I often thought about what my wedding would be like. What did you think, Colt? Jade waved a hand in front of Colt's face. Earth to Colt. Yeah, no, it was good. I'm just tired. A boy with a khaki green shirt and pants came into his line of sight, gaping at Scoutmaster Jeff from a nearby punch ball. Hey, do you guys see that weird kid by the punch ball? Colt, that's not nice, Jade said. But yes, it's kind of weird to see a kid wearing a Boy Scout uniform. The boy took slow, almost robotic movements towards Scoutmaster Jeff's chair. No, he is weird, Sasha said. Who dresses their kid like that for a wedding? Oh God. Jordan, what's wrong now? You two have been acting weird and quiet all night. I saw that same kid when I was little. Jordan's voice cracked when he spoke. We were camping on Gardner Lake. He was standing on the docks, just staring out into the darkness. He wanted me to bring him the Scoutmaster. By the time I brought the Scoutmaster there,
You got that's creepy.
Sasha said, flicking the band of her watch. But it can't be the same kid Jordan. That was many years ago. No sash. He's wearing the same uniform he did that day. You see that hat he's wearing? It's called a Barrett or Garrison cap. My dad wore the same thing when he was a scout in the 70s. The four of them watched as the boy tapped the Scoutmaster on his shoulder. Scoutmaster Jeff turned around, his jaw dropping as he saw the little boy. The other adults at the table smiled widely at the little boy's presence, many wondering out loud if he was a family member or related to someone in the wedding party. Can I help you? Scoutmaster Jeff asked, forcing a joyful tone. You're dressed up tonight. If you tell the truth, you will save us all, the boy said, his face and tone completely deadpan. What was that, buddy? If you tell the truth, you will save us all, the boy screamed, drawing the table to complete silence. At the end of the table, someone shattered a wine glass. I'm sorry. Is your mommy or daddy nearby? Your parents are my parents, the boy said firmly. If you tell the truth, you will save us all. All eyes were on the Scoutmaster and the boy. All voices ceased, save for the distant wedding band. The Scoutmaster stood up from the table and knelt at the boy's level. I'm sorry, everyone? I recognize you now, William. You've gotten so big. I'm sorry, everyone. That's my cousin Henry's kid. His family's going through a tough time. The Scoutmaster grabbed the boy by the hand and squeezed. Your daddy went outside to get some fresh air. Let's go find him. Your parents are my parents. The boy screamed as the Scoutmaster whisked him away through the grand double doors that led to the courtyard by the lake. or parents are dead. If you tell the truth, you will save us all." As the door slammed behind them, almost everyone in the venue returned to normal activity and chatter. Sasha, Jordan, Colt, and Jade glanced at each other and then back at the door several times before Colt rose to his feet and crept out the same doors into the bitter night. A few moments later, Jordan and the others followed. The stone courtyard, a popular feature in the summer and fall, remained completely dark, its moss walls blanketed by snow and ice. Beyond the walls of the courtyard, Colt spotted the scoutmaster and the boy standing on the venue's wooden dock, covered in poinsettia petals from a photo shoot hours earlier. A black and white motorized fishing boat was moored to the docks. "They're on the dock over there, and that's the scoutmaster's boat," Colt said, hands stiff in his jacket pockets. The others gathered around him, each placing a hand on his waist. "They're just yelling at each other, but I can't hear what they're saying." "What are you planning to do?" "Colt." Jordan's voice trembled at the word do. "Whatever you're doing, please be careful." Jade followed. Sasha nodded. "What's the plan, Colt?" "What do you mean?" Colt said. "You guys aren't going to try and stop me." They shook their heads. "We've been through too much together these past few months," Sasha whispered. "I'm going to stop him," Colt stated firmly. "He's hurt too many people." A cold breeze blew in from the lake. From inside the venue, they could hear the band, playing the recessional song in loud cheers as the wedding party entered the room. As the music and cheers carried into the night, the scoutmaster glanced over his shoulder, taking a few steps away from the boy. Then he ran a full sprint back into the venue, not even noticing them. "You want to go back and..." Colt. Jade asked as the scoutmaster's voice boomed over the mic, triggering more cheers. He shook his head. "You want to talk to the kid, don't you?" Jordan sighed as Colt uttered a yay under his misty breath. "Do you want us to come with you? Only if you're comfortable." "None of us are comfortable," Sasha replied with an awkward chuckle. "But let's go find out what the weird kid wants." But as the four of them trudged through the snow, the young boy echoed part of the Boy Scout chant into the wind with strength and repetition. "Help other people at all times. Help other people at all times. Help other people at all times." As they stepped onto the dock, Colt gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulders. The boy felt cold to the touch, colder than the harsh December wind. He expected his hand to go through the boy, but it remained firm as the boy glanced up at him. "I failed," the boy said in a low, solemn tone. "I failed my oath." "What oath?" "To help other people at all times. I grew up to hurt other people. I grew up to be a monster, and that monster doesn't want to save any of us." Colt heard the boy sob, deep, uncontrollable sobs. "Are you Jeffrey?" The boy nodded, tears piercing the dock like fallen icicles. "But how is that possible? Scoutmaster Jeff is." As the boy wept, Jordan spoke hoarsely. "Alev, you're a living ghost, an eerie, aren't you, Jeffrey?" The boy nodded again. As he continued to sob, each tear froze and dissipated on the wooden dock. "A what?" the ladies muttered collectively. "An eerie is a living ghost. The Japanese believe that an eerie is a disembodied spirit that leaves the body of a living person to haunt people or places, sometimes nearby, sometimes across close distances." The three of them stood jaw agape as the boy stopped weeping. "Why are you here?" either Jade or Sasha asked. Colt couldn't tell. He was feeling drowsy again. "I've always been here," the boy said coldly. "What do you plan to do tonight?" "I need them to see me. I need them to see the others." "Do we have Icaris?" Jordan asked, his voice now a faint whisper. The boy's frosty blue eyes affirmed his question. "Where are they?" "In the sinking house." And with those words, the boy began to shriek, his jaws stretching to inhuman proportions, his eyes retreating into their sockets. The shriek was so audible and unsettling that it caused the icicles overhanging the venue to crash into the courtyard. The shriek carried into the depths of the night, shattering the light from the stars and the ominous blue moon. In darkness once more, Colt not only felt drowsy, but as if he was falling, much like the way he fell into the abyss of Gardner Lake as a timid 13-year-old. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colt heard the scoutmaster's voice as he drifted back into consciousness. He found himself standing on the dance floor next to the others who were visibly shaken, especially Jordan with moist eyes and teeth chattering. Caleb and Samantha Saunders will take their first dance as husband and wife. As Colt saw light again, the crowd cheered as the newlyweds took their place on the dance floor. "Let's get the hell out of here after this," Sasha harshly whispered. I have no idea what's going on. The first dance commencing drowned out Jade and Jordan's words. For some reason, the band was shrouded in darkness. The spotlight shined on the couple as they took their places, gazing tenderly into each other's eyes. Colt was surprised about how genuinely Caleb looked at her. She looked beautiful, however, and Colt found himself genuinely happy as they began to dance to a song he recognized by the band Lifehouse, but forgot the name of. "This is the first normal thing about tonight," Colt said. All the others could do was nod and smile hesitantly as the two glided across the dance floor in an elegant waltz. As the minutes passed, they smiled warmly at the happy couple and clapped as they moved into a break with underarm turn. "You both are right," Jordan said, not knowing whether to smile warmly or shiver at the thought of something else happening. "This is surprisingly beautiful, but let's make our exit after." Suddenly, the music stopped and the spotlight shifted from the happy couple to the little boy, who was now holding a sleek, silver condenser microphone with a long handle. The feedback from the microphone caused many people to cover their ears. "I would like to dedicate a song to the happy couple to free the spirits within us tonight." The audience awkwardly clapped as the spotlight shifted to Scoutmaster Jeff. The hesitant clapping turned to loud, raucous applause as the boy motioned for the Scoutmaster to step up to the microphone. "I would like my cousin to sing this song with me." The boy's voice became distorted, and the feedback from the microphone increased, booming so violently that the crowd ducked and gasped as it boomed into the walls. The Scoutmaster shook his head furiously, but then the boy curled the mic's handle, causing him to slide across the floor into the center of the dance floor. "I think the band knows this song." The boy twisted the mic again, and the band started to play the familiar, awful song that had haunted the lake for many years. The five-piece band was stunned as they started the notes of Swaney River. The piano player and saxophonist appeared to be losing control of their fingers, while the bass player and guitarist seemed to enjoy the notes coming from their instruments. Eyes completely glazed over. The boy twisted the microphone twice more, subsequently twisting the jaw of Scoutmaster Jeff and the movements of Kalanov and Samantha into a smooth swing. He laughed heartily, extracting the notes and movements of the God-forsaken song from all involved. "Way down upon the Swaney River, far, far away. There's where my heart is turning ever. There's where the old folks stay." As the boy sang, the band played and the Scoutmaster unwittingly sang along. The ground underneath them shook, shifting the tables and chairs. The audience screamed along with the band as they scrambled to grab their instruments and stay afoot. Jordan helped Sasha to her feet and Jade helped Colt to his while the boy remained at the microphone, singing the chorus once again. This time, the words caused Colt an even sharper migraine. Then, a bright flash exploded across the room, overwhelming Colt with countless memories. Colt saw himself at 12 in the living room with Scoutmaster Jeff and his father. His father was sobbing and angry. The Scoutmaster explained to him that his urges were natural, but required self-control. Colt saw himself at 13 in a dark tent, waking up to the Scoutmaster breathing down his neck. The Scoutmaster explained that Colt had a medical emergency and needed monitoring. Colt saw himself at 11, asking Jordan why he was crying after he came home from a fishing trip that Colt had missed due to being ill. Jordan told him he had taken a bad fall and had an upper leg injury to show it. Colt saw himself at 14, a year after he quit Scouts, talking to Jordan in the cafeteria about Benji being arrested in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, smashing beer bottles and screaming. Benji claimed in court that his father had abused him. Colt remembered Scoutmaster Jeff picking him up from high school and bringing him to AA meetings. Colt saw himself as a sophomore in college, abruptly ending a romantic encounter after being touched below his waistline. Later that night, Colt cried to Jade that he didn't know why he was so scared. When the bright flash ended, Jordan and Colt looked up at the ladies with tears in their eyes. "Scoutmaster Jeff is a monster," Jordan screamed, pushing a chair into a table. "I was only a kid. I was only a. Sasha grabbed Jordan and pulled him in closer while he screamed into her chest. I never knew why, Colt said as Jade hugged him. I never knew why I was so scared until I remembered what that man did to me. The crowd was abuzz with chatter as several more men, including Benji and Caleb, approached the scoutmaster, who stood unmoved as 4 men approached him from all sides, each one more rage filled than the other. You said my father caused my bruises, but he never touched me, Benji screamed, raising a fist to his face. I should kill you right now. You told me I couldn't like guys and girls. Caleb took a step closer as the scoutmaster bit his upper lip. My parents sent me to therapy because of you, but they didn't believe me when I told them. I can't. Caleb stormed off into the vast sea of angry and confused faces, which were gathering nearer as the men continued to shout. Samantha frantically chased after him. Our parents trusted you, a dark-skinned man with a fedora said solemnly, grabbing the lapels of the scoutmaster's jacket. His twin brother, who wore a matching fedora, hung his head low, shaking violently. They trusted you to take us on a fishing trip because they both had to work. You know what you did to us. The scoutmaster took a few steps back. The crowd, over 100 people, including the band, stepped closer to the scoutmaster, shouting and swearing. The little boy stood motionless in the middle of the floor. The scoutmaster scrambled to the serving table and grabbed a butcher knife, raising it in the air. What are you going to do with that? Benji shouted. Are you going to stab us all? I dare you to try. How about you start with me first? With the knife trembling in his hand, the scoutmaster took a step toward the boy, stabbing the butcher knife into his neck. The boy dropped to his knees, grasping his neck, but no blood fell through the gash. The boy tried to scream, but no sound emerged, as his eyes rolled back into their sockets. His image untethered like a ball of yarn, each string a vibrant color of his original image. Colt ran toward the boy, attempting to grab a hold of the strings, but as each stand fell into the palm of his hands, they disappeared into thin air. Colt fell into blackness again. You seriously forgot? Sasha giggled. Jordan played with her hair until she smacked his hand away. Hun, we're going to Samantha's wedding today. You were sleeping all day, Jade said. You were talking really loudly in your sleep and said you never knew why. Oh no, Colt said. Oh no? It couldn't have been. Some dream you were having, Jordan said. You were saying Scoutmaster Jeff was a monster and his eerie was their and. I haven't heard that word in a long time. Was that the one we had when we were kids? Wes. He's the officiating pastor today. He's right, Sasha said, looking up from her phone. Were you close with this guy? We all were, Colt shouted. It couldn't have been a dream. It couldn't have. Maybe you were. You were, Jordan said. But I barely remember the guy. That's impossible. How could you forget what he did to us? How could you forget what he did to Benji and Caleb? Benji and Caleb, those guys who used to bully us, did he punish them? If so, they deserved it. Phew. They were real jerks. The Jade put an arm around his shoulder and directed him to his room. We've been through a lot these past few months, more than anyone should have to go through. I don't know who this guy is, but if you want to stay home, you can. No, Colt shouted. No, it must have been an awful dream. I was at the wedding and so much strange stuff happened. Supernatural even. But we all need therapy of some sort, she said. I'm starting again when my insurance clears, and even Sasha and Jordan were talking about it too. If you're having dreams like this, maybe you should. Yeah. What he did to us wasn't a dream, though. Will you talk to him about this? Jade agreed, but for the entirety of the car ride, Colt stayed silent just as he had done all those years. He was beginning to forget, too. He was beginning to forget what exactly was Scoutmaster Jeff had done. Even his face was starting to become blurry. The anger and sadness deep inside Colt remained. When Colt's friends asked him if he was okay, he couldn't even nod. He just stared straight ahead at the windshield wipers as they crushed the slush and icicles. When they arrived at the venue, there was an inordinate amount of people standing out in the cold. They scattered around the venue and by the shores of the lake. Some of the guests carried flashlights. Another one pulled a barking dog on a leash. As Jordan pulled into the parking lot, Samantha rushed up to the car in her off-white wedding dress, a mixture of makeup and tears rolling down her cheeks. Sasha and Jade threw their arms around her. "What's wrong, sweetie? Why's everyone out here?" "It's awful. We can't find Caleb. All morning he was talking about some terrible dream he had and none of it made sense. He talked about having to find a house. I don't know. I thought he was over it when he got to the venue, but when it was time for the photo shoot, no one could find him." "That's terrible," Jade exclaimed. "Colt."
Where are you going, Colt?
As his friend shouted, Colt started sprinting toward the rear of the venue. The snow was thick, knee-deep to his ankles, and he wasn't particularly good at running. After almost tripping over a jagged rock and narrowly smashing into a stone bench, he reached the courtyard. Colt bent over to catch his breath. By the docks, he saw Scoutmaster Jeff in his black and white motorized fishing boat. As Colt neared the docks, the Scoutmaster waved to him. "By golly," the Scoutmaster said, "if it isn't Colt Chambers from Troop 072. It's been ages. I don't know if you've heard, but our groom has disappeared. I could use a good scout and a fine man like you to help." "Sure," Colt said, stepping into the boat. "Did he have his boat on him?" "It's the darndest thing." Colt cringed as the Scoutmaster threw an arm around him. "I know he has a kayak, but no one knows. You've become nice and strong. You're so grown up now. He might be in the middle of the lake." "Why do you say that?" "Just a feeling." As the boat sped toward the center of Gardner Lake, Colt shivered. He felt his hands go numb, sweat dripping down the back of his suit to his waist. Despite all that, he remained completely still. Gray and black clouds of the ominous blue moon. The lake was silent. Not even a cool winter breeze passed their way. Colt instructed the Scoutmaster to shut off the boat in case they could hear any yelling. As the Scoutmaster turned the key, Colt wrung both his hands around his neck and squeezed as hard as he could. To Colt's surprise, he didn't move. His neck was too meaty, so Colt put in a chokehold, squeezing him even tighter. "I know what you did to Caleb that day on the boat 15 years ago. Don't you dare look at me that way, not now. Not anymore. That's why you brought him out here. He remembers everything, and so do I. I remember everything you did to us, every awful, disgusting thing. The thing you didn't count on was all the disembodied spirits you created from what you did. You can't keep them in the house forever, and you can't kill them all. Even if you killed him, even if you kill me, they'll still be there." The Scoutmaster thrust Colt's arms away, freeing himself from the chokehold. As Colt stood up, Scoutmaster Jeff punched his nose, which caused him to stumble backward, falling overboard into the water. Despite being a good swimmer, Colt fainted at the sight of blood and sank rapidly, deep into a dark abyss. He awoke to find his body smashing through a pine door. His body kept sinking until he hit an oak staircase. Just as he was about to double over in agony, he felt something pull him. He glanced up to see Caleb, completely unharmed, and smiled gleefully. Surrounding Caleb were several other beings he couldn't quite discern, except for the green outline of their Boy Scout uniforms, each patched with the words, Troop 072. Their faces were warped and pixelated. Their hairstyles looked strikingly familiar, however, to the type Colt and his friends were as teenagers. He even recognized one with the man bun Jordan had as a teenager and the blue-streaked, spiky hair Benji wore. Colt, Caleb, and the beings, which now numbered several dozen, pushed their way to the surface as the never-ending cavity walls of the old colonial house fell beneath them. The portraits on those walls were empty. The last part of the house that fell past him was a living room with a mahogany grand piano. At the bench of the piano sat the little boy with a khaki, green shirt and pants, smiling sheepishly as the house collapsed once and for all into the depths of the lake. Colt and Caleb were the first ones to emerge from the water. The black and white speedboat circled the perimeter, its propellers chopping through the waves. As soon as the Scoutmaster noticed where they were, he put his boat into reverse and accelerated toward them, its aluminum propellers cutting toward them like a buzzsaw on firewood. The rapid movement of the propellers and screeching sound left them frozen with no time to react. When the blades were inches away from their heads, Colt saw a dozen warped and pixelated faces emerge from the water from one side of the boat, and then a dozen more from the other. The sight of the faces startled the Scoutmaster as he stumbled backward off the pedal. 4 of the beings crawled into the boat and grabbed a hold of the Scoutmaster's legs and arms, tossing him like a rag doll into the water. The Scoutmaster screamed as the beings piled on him and pulled him underneath the now crashing waves. Colt and Caleb climbed into the fishing boat and spent the next several minutes catching their breath as the submerged screams faded away. The lake grew silent once more. As Caleb turned the keys in the ignition, he heard the tinny, creaky notes of Swaney River echo into the night. I knew one day I would have to tell this story. It took me a year to finally sit down and do it. I've been told that doing this could help me move on, but that's not what this is for. I don't expect to move on. The girl in Vol.2 will always be with me. I'm telling this story simply because I have to. I lived there for 2 years. It was a tiny little unit, tucked away on the very right of the 4th floor. Bachelor is almost generous. It was the kind of dingy place that never looks bright no matter how many lights you have on, but I liked it. I'm good with a small space. I enjoy not having that much to take care of. I could do without the bug problems, the leaks, the electrical problems, and the rotten smells that just sort of happen. But it is what it is. There was a level of comfort, as well, to living on the 4th floor. Nobody robs a random 4th floor apartment unit. Nobody can peek into your window. It's unlikely to get shot at, yeah. I lived in one of those kinds of cities. You didn't walk around at night if you could help it. You just didn't. I got accustomed to noise there. The cars, the sirens, the dogs barking, the shouting, the occasional echoing pop of a gunshot. It all becomes a whirling auditory soup. I learned to tune it out fairly quickly. In fact, I learned to tune out a lot of things. I was in one of those periods of life that I think some people call the grind. But really it's more like being beaten into submission. Working to live, living to work, not living at all, just continuing to exist. All of this to say I wasn't very perceptive or sociable at this time. I was sleepwalking and daydreaming through life. I'd say I could do my routine blindfolded, except for the fact that I would stub my toe in the same spot on the coffee table 4 times a week at least. Funny how that works. I guess that was part of the routine too. But that's what I mean about not being perceptive. The building could have caught fire, and most days I probably wouldn't have noticed until I actually went up in flames. I didn't retain any face I saw or names I heard. It was all just a blur, each day blending into the next, until one night, I got home from work like usual in the evening as the sun began to descend past the buildings. I couldn't afford a car, but thankfully my work was close enough to walk to. The days were getting shorter now, so my walks home became more brisk. The apartment still smelled of dust and paint, as they had finally sent someone to replace a moldy bit of wall the day before. I could still feel the sensation of dust collecting on my tongue when I opened my mouth, and it getting sucked into my nose with every inhale. The smell of paint was strong, but infinitely better than some of the other smells. I opened the window to attempt to ventilate the place. I emptied the bucket of rust-colored water collecting in the bathroom. They couldn't be bothered to fix that as well. And I collapsed onto my bed. This was my ritual. After every work day, I would always take 10-15 minutes to just spread out on my bed like a cat and decompress from everything. But tonight, after about 2 minutes, I heard a noise. This noise stood out from all the outdoor soup because it sounded a lot closer, and it sounded like a voice. A soft feminine voice, making some kind of subtle moan or whimper. I froze in place. It startled me. It sounded so close, like it might be in the room. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't want to make a noise. I wanted to hear it again so I could tell where it was coming from. For a second I thought it might be coming from under my bed. After a few seconds, the sound repeated. A faint, girly whimper, a bit louder than the last one. This time I could tell where it was coming from. It was behind me. Specifically, the other side of the wall behind my bed. That gave me some relief. It was my neighbor. But then I was confused. I didn't remember ever hearing my neighbor making noise before. If I could suddenly hear a noise that soft, that mild, why couldn't I hear anything before? Did I even have a neighbor before? Is this person new? I felt a rush of shame at just how detached I had become. I reached back into my mind to try and recall any memories I had about my neighbor. I couldn't find a single one. I remembered some people being on my floor, but I couldn't remember ever seeing anyone enter or exit the door next to mine. I did, however, recall seeing people yesterday morning trying to move a couch up the stairs in the lobby. It was a fairly regular occurrence to see things like this. People rotated in and out of this place all the time. I suppose nobody else really wanted to stick around that long, and I can see why. But I guess that answers it. As peculiar as it is, I didn't have a neighbor before for 2 years and now I do. And now they're whimpering. Why are they whimpering? Slowly these sporadic whimpers become more defined sobs. A woman was crying. I didn't know what to do. I just decided to be as quiet as possible and put on some headphones to let them have their privacy and spare myself from feeling any more awkward. It felt wrong to hear this, and I immediately felt bad for this person. I made sure to play some extra loud music. About an hour later, I removed my headphones and the noises had stopped in the interim. I very briefly debated going over and telling them about how thin the walls apparently are, but I made the much easier decision to wait. Wait until they do something loud and not so private so I can use that as the excuse, like the TV or something. I was weighing my options, but I couldn't talk to them about Teach Ice. I couldn't say, "Hey, you were crying real loud over there." The rest of the night was quiet, but I didn't have the best sleep. This disturbance in the routine, and the thought of having to face this person at some point was giving me some anxiety. By the morning, however, the alarm kicked me back into the routine. I heard no noises from the neighbor, so life resumed. I got back home from work that night, much later than usual, because someone decided to no-show at work. Walking home in the dark made me paranoid, and I hated days when this happened. When I got inside, I was relieved, and the dust and paint were not nearly as oppressive to the senses this time. I did the window, the water bucket, and then collapsed on the bed like clockwork. What happened yesterday was still on my mind, so I made sure to be extra quiet when laying down. After a few seconds of silence, I was ready to try and remove the whole ordeal from my brain. Then I heard the voice. I couldn't make out the first word I heard from the other side of the wall, but I listened for the rest. It was a poetry book. I heard in a muffled but distinctly feminine voice. Quieter than yesterday, I thought. She must be further away from the wall. I can't remember exactly. It always feels like we're going somewhere. Maybe that's why we see them most at night. I mixed up our glasses. There was a moderate gap of a few seconds between everything she said. Clearly, I was only hearing half of a conversation. Phone conversation most likely, or else the other person is just insanely quiet. It was difficult to gauge her tone from how muffled the voice was, but there was a kind of melancholy in it. I wondered what was going on, and I kind of laughed at how random the phrases were. I thought about listening further, but I stopped myself. It wasn't my business. It's not for me to hear. I once again thought about going over and letting her know about the noise, but it didn't feel like a good time. I put on my headphones once again to try and enjoy the minimal amount of respite I had left in the day, and that was the end of it for that night. The third night I got home on time. I was a bit surprised not to hear anything from her at first. I guessed that maybe she went to bed early or went out for the night. It was Friday after all. Usually people do things on Friday nights. I still made sure to be quiet when near her wall, just in case she was sleeping. I made a mental note to look up how much soundproofing panels cost. I probably should have thought of that earlier. I got up from my 15-minute work sucks bed sprawling and headed over to my computer to do that important research, but as I often did, I forgot my coffee table exists, and I stubbed my toe. The heavy table shifted inches across the wooden floor, and pain shot through me like a shockwave. I don't remember which expletive left my mouth involuntarily that time, but it was definitely one of them. I was so annoyed every damn time. I could just move the table. Why don't I ever just move the fucking table? Are you okay? My heart leapt in my chest. I physically jumped back on one leg. I thought she wasn't home, and I forgot how close she could sound. It scared the shit out of me. She also spoke quite loudly. She probably assumed it would be harder to hear through the wall than it was. "Oh, yeah, I'm good. Sorry." I just stubbed my toe. I responded back in a shaky voice. "Shit, that sucks." I could hear a chuckle in her voice. She was clearly amused. Her volume decreased to match mine. I laughed in return. "It happens all the time. So sorry to disturb you." No, it's fine. I'm just reading you sure you're good. That sounded violent. She responded, sounding half concerned and half joking. Yeah, no, I'm right. Sounded worse than it was. It's a heavy table and the walls here. I began to explain before she cut me off. Dear Rael Wythin. She finished my thought and then continued, I can hear you so well, that's insane. I'm surprised I didn't hear you before now. Yeah, I guess I'm quiet and, well, I'm at work most of the day and get home late. So, I didn't like how awkward I sounded. I think I forgot how to have normal conversations. Has it been noisy for you? I'm sorry if it was. I didn't know. I just moved in. She sounded very kind and friendly. I was taken aback by it a little bit. Don't be sorry and nothing much. I think I probably heard you talking on the phone a bit the other night. I didn't listen in or anything. I put on my headphones. I explained. I hope she believed me about the headphones. It was the truth, but it's hard to trust that sort of thing. I didn't mention the crying. I didn't want her to feel awkward or anything. Oh, sorry about that, she said. I detected a hint of confusion in her voice, but I ignored it. It's okay. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I just didn't know when it would be a good time, and it's new to me too. I didn't have a neighbor before, I don't think. As I spoke, I found it harder to rationalize why I hadn't told her before now. I really should have. Really? How long have you been here? She asked. 2 years. No one lived here before me for 2 years. Are you sure? She was very perplexed. Well, honestly, no, I'm not sure. I just never heard anyone before. And I never saw anyone before. I probably sounded like a total recluse, but I was more interested in why she was so confused. Well, that's strange. I'm pretty sure there were people living here right before me. At least that's what the guy said. Her tone had shifted, and what she said sent a bit of a shiver down my spine. It didn't make any sense. How could I not hear them? Not once, when I can practically hear this woman breathing. After a brief silence, she spoke again and returned to a more casual tone. Well, maybe they weren't around much. Maybe it was a second home or something. Anyways, sorry again about the noise. I'll get some soundproofing stuff for my end right away. I admired her positivity, and I didn't feel any judgment from her for how strange I probably came across. It was really nice. And she had a point about it being a second home. That could be the case. I don't know why they would have a second home in this shitty building, but what else could the explanation be? I'm Jane, by the way. Nice to kind of meet you. She added in a chipper manner. While it was refreshing to have such a pleasant interaction, a small part of me worried about her. She was so carefree and optimistic, almost naive. She must be new to the city. I wondered how long it would take before this place whittled away at her trust in humanity. The trust that she seemed to give to me so freely. The thought of her spirits being slowly crushed like mine made me sad. I'm Lay. Nice to meet you too. A small impulse told me not to give my name, but I decided to reciprocate her trust. Yeah, I'll soundproof my end too. Have a good rest of your night. Be careful, Ball, she said. I found that slightly ominous, but then I remembered the toe thing. I will. I chuckled. Enjoy your book. That was my first conversation with the girl in 42, over that weekend. We spent a lot of time getting acclimated to each other's presence as we each waited to get our soundproofing. I expected it to be a lot more awkward than it was. I attribute all of that to her. She had a way of making everything seem fine and almost playful. She would knock on the wall 2 times and say things like, about to vacuum, sorry, and my bad when she would make noise. I would follow her lead and do the same 2 knocks. It was kind of nice. Out of the blue on Sunday, she knocked twice and said, you know it's weird. I don't hear my neighbors on the other side at all. Only you. We pondered over that a bit. She didn't seem to sweat it much, but it was odd that it was only on one side. These odd things were beginning to stack up. Why just this wall? Why only now? I began to wonder if more odd things have been happening all along, and I'm only starting to notice them now. Monday night I got home to find my package had arrived. The soundproofing was here. It was a little bittersweet seeing it on my doorstep. I knocked twice and told her I got it. She confirmed that she got hers too. She actually went out and physically bought it. I guess that speaks to the kind of people we are. We both said we'd put it up right away. Both of us not wanting to continue to inconvenience each other any longer, but then that didn't end up happening. Instead, we just kept talking. I didn't mean to, and I don't think she did either, but we just kept finding more to say. The friendly small talk about the building and whatnot gave way to more meaningful conversation. We talked about how we got to where we were. We talked about where we wanted to go from here. I wound up sitting on the floor with my back to her wall, and I could hear words right behind my head as if we were back to back. Luckily, the paint on that bit of wall was dry by now. To her, this place was a fresh start. She didn't go into detail, and I didn't want to pry, but it was clear that this was some kind of escape from something. Maybe that's why she was so upbeat, because she was able to escape a bad situation. Or maybe she was just always this upbeat. She told me that she was going to enroll in the college here, and that she was going to start an online shop and work as a waitress on the side. Eventually, she wanted to open a restaurant. She even told me where and what the name and theme would be. She told me all these plans, all these wonderful things she wanted to do, all laid out step by step. I don't know what was preventing her from doing them before, but it made me smile hearing how excited she was about them. Something about the conviction in her voice made me truly believe she could do it all. Then she asked me about my plans. I froze up a bit. I didn't have plans. I wish I did. I was envious of people who did, but I could never seem to figure it out. At some point, I think I shut that part of me off entirely. This was as far as I got, is what I told her. We sat in silence for a bit after that. "There's still time," she said softly, breaking the silence. I could feel in her voice a new level of comfort and safety. All guards were down on both sides. She knew what I needed to hear, and I knew somehow that those words meant more coming from her than they would anyone else. We simply got each other. In that moment, there was no wall. Eventually, we said goodnight and agreed to put the panels up tomorrow. Those soft, comforting words rattled around in my brain all night long. They never really left. I woke up early the next day, and I began putting them up before work. It was a bit sad at first, but it's not like she was gone or anything. She was still right next door. We could just be friends normally now. I went to work excited about the idea. On my way home, I decided that I would properly introduce myself face to face, just to say hi. I felt confident enough in doing so by this point of knowing her. I got up to the door of Vol.2, and after a brief hesitation, I did the 2 knocks. About 2 minutes passed, and there was no answer. I tried again, still nothing. I was disappointed but not dejected. She must not be around. I'll try again tomorrow, I thought. When I got inside, I was immediately struck by how much quieter it was. All that constant city noise was getting absorbed by the panels. I didn't even think about that. I wasn't used to this kind of quiet. Now every small sound was large. I felt vulnerable. Like all the noise was a big comfy blanket I could hide under, and now I'm exposed like a nerve. It would take some getting used to. An hour passed in this utter dreary silence. I tried to brave it without distraction to try and acclimate as quickly as possible, but it was just too freaky, so I had to put on some music. Not 5 seconds into the song, I heard "No Way" coming from the wall. It was her. "Jane, you can still hear me." I almost shouted in disbelief. "Did you put your things up?" She responded. Her voice was exactly as clear as before. "Yeah, did you?" "I covered the whole wall," she shouted. What the hell? I was feeling mixed emotions. On one hand, it was nice to talk to her again. On the other hand, what the hell? We were both utterly stumped by this. Neither of us could come up with an explanation or a solution. She offered to try and ask the super to come do something. I told her she could TRY. Eventually, we settled back down and accepted the situation. "Well, shit, I guess you're here to stay," she said. "I guess I am." I couldn't tell if she was happy about this or annoyed. I couldn't quite tell if I was either. "All right, I hope you like ABA then." I hated ABBA. This was a nightmare. We resumed our routine from the days before. It remained mildly inconvenient, while also being oddly comforting. That night we talked more, sat in the same spots on the floor as the night before. I don't know why we chose to sit on the floor when both of our beds were right there, but it felt right. The discoloration of the new patch of paint on the wall marked the talking spot perfectly, and it felt a bit nostalgic. It's not often you sit on the floor as an adult. With all the excess noise being drowned out, it felt like she was even closer. I could literally hear her breathing. We talked a little bit about our upbringings, and we aren't terribly different. Her dad sucked, my dad died. We all got fucked up somehow. The good news is she informed me that I don't snore loudly at night, which is a huge relief. I laid up in bed after she had said goodnight. I still hadn't acclimated to the silence, and now I had to bear it if I wanted to sleep. It wasn't working. I was just awake with my thoughts, which is a place I usually hate being, but not so much tonight. I thought about Jane, and I thought about the weirdness of this situation. As odd as it all was, it was at least interesting. By far the most interesting thing to happen to me since I moved here. I began having those middle-of-the-night urges to Google the principles of sound waves and how they travel, or how often apartments are vacant for long periods of time. But I resisted, determined that if I laid here unmoving in the dark long enough, sleep would happen. Briefly piercing the silence, I heard a mattress creak a few times and blankets shift. It sounded like she rolled over. Then back to nothing. I checked the clock, 2 a.m. Maybe sleep was hopeless. I stared into the dark of my apartment, so long I started seeing abstract shapes and folds fade in and out of the shadows, and the walls seemed to wobble, as they are wont to do. I was so tired. I began to fade, but then another mattress creak brought me back to lucidity. This one was different. It was a deeper creak and singular like one fluid motion. She sat up, without question. That was the sound, but that was the only sound. No creaks, no fidgeting, no swiping sounds of blankets moving while she slowly awoke. It was strange and abrupt. It could be that she had a nightmare, but there was no heavy breathing or gasping or any of that. I waited to hear another sound, but it didn't come. A half hour passed. I didn't hear her get out of bed. I didn't hear her lay back down. Was she just sitting? My mind began to paint a picture of a woman sitting still in bed in the pitch black darkness, and it unnerved me. Maybe she did lay back down, just slowly and softly enough that I didn't hear it, I thought. Maybe she had her book or something she said she was reading the other day. Maybe she never sat up at all, and I mistook that sound for something else. I didn't hear anything else that night, and about an hour later I managed to get some sleep. I wondered if I could bring this up to her. Would it be weird? Eventually I decided against it. I don't want her thinking about me listening to her sleep. The situation is already a bit uncomfortable as it is when it comes to privacy. Plus, it was probably nothing. The next night I got home and double knocked on the wall. She double knocked back. This was our new normal. Hey, never date a tennis player. You know why? She said. Was that? I responded through my grin as I dealt with the water bucket once again. Love means nothing to them. She made sure to sound extra dramatic. That's wow. That's tremendous. I responded, bemused. I'm going to hit you with one of those every day, I decided, she said emphatically. Oh God. I pretended to sound annoyed. That's right. This is why I don't have a boyfriend. They run away. But you can't run away. I can move away. No, you can't. You're broke as shit just like me. If you could have... She had it by a point. So deal with it. Here, what do you call a beehive with no exit? No? No more. This is harassment. I weep for your future husband when you bring a man over. I'm going to shout at him to run as fast as he can. I will just scream bloody murder until he leaves. Bit ye a Babel. Well done it. Got that one. I got like that. I replied, I couldn't lie. Also, I'm never bringing a man over here. Are you kidding? You hear enough as it is. Again, she had a point. We went about our business, and later that night we talked a bit more. These floor chats, before bed we'd started having, had become a highlight of my day, and I began looking forward to them while I was at work. A part of my brain was trying to recontextualize this into a romantic thing, but it really wasn't that, and I didn't want it to be. At least not right now. It was just nice. It was nice having someone to talk to who was easy to talk to, who made me laugh, and who I felt comfortable with. It was nice to feel genuinely connected to somebody after feeling disconnected for so long. It was nice to have a friend. Can I ask you something? I inquired. Yeah. She answered without hesitation. Why did you trust me so early on? I had this question for a while, but I felt comfortable enough now to ask. Jane paused for a moment before responding. What makes you think I trusted you? I was a bit taken aback by her question. Oh, well, you were just so friendly and open. I was just wondering, this is a seedy place, and you don't know me. She cut me off. I was friendly, yeah, but that's how you have to be. That's like customer service voice. I don't want to anger the strange man living next to me, you know. That made a lot of sense. I didn't think of it that way. She continued, but I trust you now. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're a good guy. I think you probably won't kill me. What about me? Do you trust me? I mean, I'm still not 100% convinced you exist, to be honest. I've still never seen you. You didn't answer your door when I tried to say hi, so you might just be a figment of my imagination. Who's to say? I joked, but a part of me thought that would actually explain things. Wait, when was this? She asked, sounding surprised. Oh, after we put up the soundproofing. I was going to say hi when I got home from work, but you didn't answer. Really? Damn. I didn't hear you. She responded, sounding legitimately disappointed. Well, that's a first, I joked. Jane Chino, right? I sighed. All right, I gotta try to get some sleep tonight. Last night was fucking awful. Yeah. I slept like a baby last night. These soundproofing things rule. For she slept like a baby. The image in my head of her sitting up in her bed replayed and gave me chills once again. Clearly, I must be mistaken. I shook off the thought. Well, I still need to get used to a good night. Jane. Hear you later, Lay. That corny son of a bitch. She was serious about doing those jokes every day, wasn't she? I heard her get up and make her way to bed. A few minutes later, and her side fell quiet. I crawled into my bed and I once again stared into the dark. Sleep still wasn't coming easy. I dreaded this, but this time it only took about an hour to fall asleep, of which I was grateful. The silence still unsettled me. Suddenly I awoke, still in the darkness, even deeper now. I don't know what woke me up, but when I checked the clock, it was 2 a.m. I wasn't happy. I tried to fall back to sleep, and it was slowly working until I heard it again. That same deep bed creak. That unmistakable sound of someone sitting up. Now I was fully awake. Minutes passed and I heard nothing else. Same as before, like she was just sitting there. This time, however, I just had to know. I was confused, concerned, and pretty creeped out. So I just leaned close to the wall and whispered, Jane. Nothing happened at first, but then I heard the bed very slowly begin to creak again. Agonizingly slow and subtle. It sounded like she was turning, or at least adjusting her position in some way. I heard what sounded like her hands touching the wall, splayed out far apart on either side of me, and then I heard her breathing. I could only hear her breathe before when we were sitting back against the wall, so she must have been pressed right up against it. Her breathing sounded different this time, though. It sounded hollow, like she had a cold. I was petrified. The hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. What was she doing? Was she even awake? What must she look like right now? I just stared at the wall, imagining her on the other side, pressed up against it like some feral thing. Was this really happening? Am I just too tired and loopy to be able to tell? Maybe the creaking was her laying back down, and she's just breathing heavier than normal because she's asleep. I wanted to rationalize this so badly. I waited for something else to happen. Some other sound. I waited hours, but nothing did, and I was too scared to say anything else. Was she still there? Was she pressed against the wall all night long? I tried to get a little bit of sleep. I managed maybe 45 minutes, but it was not pleasant. I couldn't focus on work the next day. I was tired, and I was so creeped out by what happened. I couldn't think of an explanation, but I knew there had to be one. There had to be something. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and every time that image replayed, she looked a little bit less human. I pictured her smiling a grotesque toothy grin. I imagined her drooling, her eyes open as wide as saucers, her fingers long and Bonnie caressing the wall. None of this was rooted in reality. I knew that, but I couldn't help but think of it. I got back home, and this time I hesitated before doing my customary knocks on the wall, but I did, and she returned them same as always. I was just thinking mankind has made a lot of great inventions. Jane, but the dry erase board has to be the most remarkable. I laughed. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to laugh at her jokes today, but I did. She's still Jane. At least she seems to be. I was way overthinking. That one's pretty good. I can't lie. You like it? She asked, sounding proud of herself. Hey, I have to ask you something, though. I said, trying to remain at least somewhat casual. Shoot. Do you sleepwalk? The other side went silent for a minute. No, never in my life. She responded instantly, sounding unnerved. I fell silent too. I didn't know how to explain, but she continued. That's a scary-ass question to ask out of nowhere. Did you hear something? I don't know exactly what I heard. Stop. Don't talk like that. Is this revenge for the corny jokes? I'll stop the corny jokes. Don't do this to me. She pleaded in a half-joking manner. No, I promise I'm not messing with you, and it's probably nothing. It's just you didn't get up at all last night, or the night before. No, I did not get up at all. Please tell me what you heard. She said firmly. I told Jane everything that happened. I tried to be delicate, but also honest. I trusted that she didn't know what was going on. That became evident to me by how freaked out she seemed. I know it sounded crazy. I just hoped she didn't think I was messing with her. It was difficult to tell from her tone. Initially, she wanted to debunk it all, saying that I must have heard something else, which I admitted could very well be true. Nevertheless, she told me she's going to stay with her sister for the night. Probably a good idea. She gave me her phone number and told me to call if anything happened. That put my mind at ease about whether or not she trusted me. I told her to be safe, and she tried once again to reassure me that it was probably nothing, but I felt a sense of immense dread as soon as she left. Suddenly, I really didn't want to be alone here. That night was the quietest of my life, and not in a good way. I thought about drowning it out by putting on some music or a movie, but nothing felt right. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sleep that night, but eventually I managed. I ended up having a dream about a woman wearing a veil. Through the veil, I could vaguely make out 3 large black holes, where her eyes and mouth should be. I couldn't recall anything that happened in the dream, only the image of that woman. I wondered if that was my subconscious way of trying to visualize Jane. I still didn't know what she actually looked like, so maybe my brain had trouble coming up with distinct features for her. Or maybe it was something else entirely. It was still dark when I woke from the dream. I felt a deep unease as I checked the time. 2 a.m. Again. This time I wasn't eager to fall back to sleep. I didn't want to see the veiled woman again, so I stayed up a little while longer, attempting to ease my mind. I thought of every possible way to reassure myself. Eventually, I began to fall into facade of comfort until creak. I went ice cold. No, this can't be. I didn't just hear that. It was that same sitting up creak. But I heard Jane leave. Could she have come back late while I was sleeping? Maybe. But what if it isn't her? What if it was never her? My mind raced. So many improbable scenarios played out in my mind. None of them were good. Was someone else in there with her the whole time and she didn't know? Someone hiding away, only coming out when she's sleeping? Was that creaker sitting up, or someone else sitting down? Do they watch her sleep? All I knew for sure was that someone was on the other side of this wall, because I could hear them breathing again. I wanted to do something. I wanted to know for sure, but I was powerless. Calling out to it last time was the most horrific mistake of my life. I didn't want to try that again. I wanted to call Jane, but I was afraid of making a sound. Instead, I just waited and listened. I was in a petrified daze, hyperalert but also completely exhausted. My body wanted to shut down, but my brain wouldn't let me. It may have been minutes, or it may have been hours, I couldn't tell. The image of the veiled woman kept reappearing in the back of my subconscious. Eventually, I decided to call Jane. If I heard a phone ring on the other side, then I would know. I typed the number in and hit call. The number you are trying to reach is not in service. What? How could that be? Suddenly, cutting through the silence was a sound I had become very familiar with, and yet was the one sound I was the least prepared for. Knock, knock. A wave of shock shot through me. It was our knock. I didn't dare respond. If that isn't her, that means whoever it is has been listening to us. Now they're reaching out to me. They know I can hear them, but what if it's just her? She came back and was trying to see if I'm still awake. The thoughts whirled around like a hurricane. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the silence. I couldn't bear the uncertainty. It was all too much. I got up, I grabbed my keys, and I left. As I walked out into the hallway, I saw her door. It looked the same as it always has, but to me, right now, it was a portal to hell. Someone or something was on the other side of that door. It might be pressed up against it. It might be looking out the peephole at me. I darted away. I simply couldn't be here anymore. I got outside and suddenly I could breathe again. The noise of the bustling city greeted me like an old friend. I never thought I would find such comfort in it. I sat down on a bench in front of my building. I wasn't going to go back, not while the sun was down. I knew where my window was, so I knew where 402's window was. I didn't want to look at it, but I had to. It was completely black. I couldn't see anything inside. That was good, I thought. But that didn't stop me from feeling like I was being watched. I felt eyes up there looming over me. I couldn't rationalize it, but something inside was telling me that whatever was in 4 and 2 wasn't a person. I fought against that thought for a long time, but I was starting to accept it. I tried my best to ignore it all. It wasn't easy. Eventually, I laid down on the hard wooden slats and was able to some much-needed shut-eye. I slept better than the last few nights. I called in sick to work the next morning. I wanted to be here when Jane got homey or to see if she was already home, and last night was a massive overaction. I felt safer seeing the sunlight beaming through my windows when I got back inside. I tried to occupy myself by catching up on some household chores. As the back of my mind waited anxiously for the next sound, I heard nothing all day. The longer it went on, the more sure I became that Jane wasn't home. As the sun set, it was apparent that she decided to stay with her sister for another night, meaning that yesterday night definitely wasn't her. Also meaning that I was here alone for another night. I tried calling again. I don't know why I expected the outcome to be different. Still wasn't in service. I made extra sure I got the number right. It was exactly the number she said. Why would she give me the wrong number? Was it a new phone and she got it wrong by accident? Or did what I said to her really freak her out and maybe she thinks I'm not to be trusted? She placated me with a false number and then got the hell away from me. That outcome would have hurt the most. But a third idea crept into my mind too, the idea that maybe SG couldn't be trusted. I vehemently resisted that idea. Night fell and the dread came with it. Part of me wanted to go outside to the bench again, but another part of me had to hear it one more time first. One more time to confirm that it was still in there, and then I could call the cops, because this needed to end. I don't know why the noises always seem to start at 2 but that's what I was waiting for. As Trezon 59 turned over, my senses sharpened. I waited and I waited, expecting that sit-up sound. Only it didn't come. I had hoped that not hearing it would put my mind at ease, but that was not the case. It only put me more on edge. I felt like I was being watched. I felt like the thing on the other side knew I was listening. I couldn't hear anything, but I could feel the presence. It was there. I knew it. I just needed confirmation. The longer the silence went on, the more doubt began to creep in. The doubt infuriated me. All of this was doubt. Every second of this nightmare was doubt, and possibility me. And maybe. I knew nothing. Nothing made sense. I was afraid and I was frustrated. So I made a decision. I stood facing the wall, carefully picking up my phone in one hand and my keys in the other, ready to run and dial 911 a moment's notice. I gathered up all the courage I had and prepared to speak. I had to call out to it. I had to know that I wasn't crazy. I opened my mouth, but before the words could escape lay. A soft voice whispered through the wall, and it was Jane. She sounded further away and her voice had a slight echo to it, but it was unmistakably her voice. Jane. The word fell out. My voice cracked. Help me. She sounded afraid. Hushed, like she didn't want to wake something. Jane, what's going on? I had a million questions. I was frantic, but I quieted my voice to match hers. Suddenly, I was afraid to wake it up too. Please help me, Lay. How are you there? When did you get back? I whispered, not covering my desperation. See it, she continued. A shiver went down my spine. I'm going to call the cops right now. They'll be right there. It was the only solution I had. I don't want to die. She fell silent after that, but I heard the breathing against the wall again. The hair on my arms stood on end. I was too scared to think straight, but I knew this wasn't right. It was her voice, but it couldn't have been her. Knock. Knock, knock. Knock, knock. I had enough. I ran out into the hallway and dialed 911. I told him there was an intruder. I kept it vague because vague is all I had. As I spoke, I kept my eyes on her door. I wouldn't let it out of my sight. If it left, I would see it. If it stayed, they would catch it, I hoped. They advised me to stay in my apartment and lock the door. I didn't listen. It took around 40 minutes for them to arrive. 2 officers arrived on my floor, and the building manager was them with keys to let them in her unit. I think his name was Larry. Like I said, I forgot a lot of names and faces. He shot me a brief glare when he saw me standing there. I probably woke him up with all this. I wanted to get a glimpse into the room, but I was ushered away, back into my unit. My stomach was in knots with stress. I just wanted this to be over. I didn't know what to expect. Would there be shouting? Would I hear a fight? Would there be gunshots? A part of me had a dreadful feeling, that they would get in there and they wouldn't find anything. Minutes passed. I waited and waited, but I couldn't hear anything from the wall. Not a peep. Why aren't they going inside? I thought out loud. Suddenly there was a knock at my door. I opened the door and sure enough it was the officers, flanked by Larry. They told me what I was afraid of. We searched the apartment and we couldn't find any signs of someone living in there. You went inside? I questioned. I knew they didn't go inside. We searched the entire unit up and down. There was no one in there. But if you hear anything again... After that point I tuned out. I exchanged the default pleasantries and they went on their way. I couldn't find a shit to give in any of their words, and I was too frustrated and exhausted to search for it. I tried to get answers. Instead, I ended up with yet another question atop the pile. Why wouldn't they go inside? What did Larry tell them? I knew I wasn't getting any sleep that night. All I could do was sit on the bed and overthink. This was all bigger than I thought it was. Jane could have been in on it. Larry could have been in on it. The police could have been in on it. For all I knew, I really didn't want to believe that Jane was in on it. The way Larry glared at me. Maybe it wasn't screw you for waking me up in the middle of the night. Maybe I stirred something up that I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the problem wasn't with Jane. Maybe there wasn't an intruder, a creature, or even a ghost. Maybe it was the room itself. As I sat and drove myself crazy with these theories, a new sound shot into my ear and sent my heart up into my throat. Some kind of rapid clacking sound. Almost sounded like someone button mashing a controller, but not as plastic A. I jumped off the bed, and the sound stopped. The room wasn't done with me yet. I had never heard this sound before. I couldn't place it at first, but once the initial shock wore off, I knew exactly what it sounded like. It sounded like teeth chattering. I didn't want to believe that's what it was. There are lots of things that sound similar to teeth chattering. If it was any other circumstance, I could easily debunk it as the place settling. Little rhythmic cracking of hard materials rubbing together, bending. But this isn't any other circumstance. I was frozen in fear once again. The images my mind involuntarily conjured up were instantly traumatizing. A wide chattering, hoarse, like bloody mouth upon a gaunt, sunken face. A naked man with hungry mouth strewn all over his body. A zipper made of teeth going all the way down a human head so it can open like a Venus flytrap. Those chattering mouth toys you get from a joke store haphazardly sewn into human flesh. I pleaded for my imagination to stop, but it simply wouldn't. The mouth abominations. The veiled women. The gullish watcher pressed against the wall. All my imagination, but imagination is powerful when reality is vague. One of them could be real, if this thing even has a form. Maybe it was just a shadow in the dark. The sounds began again. Now I heard scratching at the wall. Not hard, not ferocious. Little light scrapes, nearly inaudible. Like it was just kind of picking at it, or scribbling against it. It sounded like having a rat in the walls. I used to be afraid of rats, I thought. Now I would love nothing more than for this to only be a rat. The sound began to change. Those little scrapes and scribbles along the wall morphed somehow. I couldn't tell if it was just my tired mind changing them the way that my tired eyes could make the stucco ceilings move and warble, but the sound changed nevertheless. The scribbles began to sound breath-wise. They started sounding more like whispers than scribbles. The content of the whispers was indiscernible. My mind went to someone in a small padded room, sitting in a corner with their legs curled up to their chest, shaking and whispering incoherent gibberish to themselves. There was an almost hypnotic effect to the whispers. I resisted the urge to move closer to try and make out any words hidden in the almost silent muttering. I wouldn't have the opportunity to try, however, because suddenly a blood-curdling scream exploded through the wall. I almost leapt out of my skin. It wasn't just any scream, it was Jane's voice again. I had never heard a scream so horrific in my life, but it was enough to break me from the trance I was falling into. I grabbed my keys and ran outside as fast as I could. I spent another night on the bench outside. At least whatever was left of the night by this point. Even outside and far away from the room, sleep wouldn't come. The images I conjured were too horrific, and the sounds replayed over and over. The deep, frustrating, impossible uncertainty of the situation loomed over me heavily, as did the eyes that I still felt watching me from the window. I was terrified, and I felt truly alone. Morning came, and I felt the relative safety of the sun. It took a while for me to gain the courage to re-enter my apartment, but I did. Then I went to work like always. Despite all this, despite being scared out of my mind, sleep-deprived, and feeling like I'm going insane, life doesn't care. The world keeps turning. I still gotta eat. If this monotonous routine wasn't already so deeply ingrained into me, I might have had a full psychotic break by now, but my body was on autopilot. Plus, I didn't like being home anymore, even in the daytime. Last night was too much. I didn't go home right away after work. I delayed as much as I could. I thought about staying somewhere else. But if Jane was back, and if she really was the friend I thought she was, I had to be there. To warn her about the thing that uses her voice. There was also one more thing that compelled me to come back. A breadcrumb I had to follow. I got into my building, but instead of heading up to the 4th floor, I went straight into the front office. I hated this little room. Unkempt, smelly, with a thick hum of fluorescent light tubes. Luckily, he was still there. Head down in some papers. I knew he had to have some kind of answers for me. He had to know something. "Larry, you got a minute?" I asked, trying my best to put some extra bass into my voice. "It's Mike. Fuck. Don't worry about it," he replied with a slight chuckle, then looked up to meet my gaze. When he saw me, his expression slightly changed. Have a seat." He seemed to be expecting this visit. He knew something. I could see it in him. I took the only seat without papers and envelopes all over it. "What can I do for you?" he asked. I had so many questions, but I wanted to choose the simplest and most broad one to start, just to see where he takes it. Only 4 words popped into my head right away. "What's wrong with 42?" Mike gave me a half-hearted grin. He knew this was coming. "Look, kid, maybe it would do you good to just get out of there for a while, okay? Stay with a relative or something." "What are you talking about?" I responded, bewildered. City life, it's not for everyone. It drives us all a little crazy sometimes. I know I love to go camping every now and again with the old lady. Once or twice a summer, get away from all this. It just gets your mind right. I saw through his words, and I knew that he could read on my face that I wasn't accepting them. "Tell me what's wrong with 402. Mike sat back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. "I don't know." He said that like it was an answer, but he continued before I could press him. "I wish I knew. It's just one of those things." "It's just one of those things," I repeated, immediately put off by his tone. "Okay, I don't really like to talk about it. I try not to. I find that's best." He paused, took a few seconds to find the words, then continued. "People don't do well in 42. Meaning they get scared and they leave, or whatever. I don't know what it is, and I'm not a superstitious type. There's just something wrong with it. That's all I can say." He explained. His body language changed. I saw him begin to fidget with his hands. "Did anything happen in that room?" I questioned. He took another big sigh. "A lot of calls to the police like yesterday, thinking there's an intruder, a man in the closet, a man under the bed, things like that, spookhouse things. That's how it started. It all sounded like nonsense. Of course, police find nothing every time. We get the place tested for a gas leak or what have you. Nada. So we carry on. What more can I do, right?" A shockwave shot through me as he said all this. I was stunned. This was the first kind of confirmation I had gotten about any of this. It's all real. All of it. It's not just me. He continued. Then things start getting worse. People started doing things to themselves. You know what I mean? They started carving themselves up. Paramedics would be in and out. It was getting really bad. Sarah, my wife, she cleans the rooms up for new tenants. They were in and out of 42 all the time, so she was in there a lot. One day she tells me she can't go in there anymore. I ask why. She says because something is watching her. She says it knows her. She says something terrible is going to happen in there. I don't know what to make of that, but she never went into 402 again. She doesn't even like going near the door, because she thinks there's someone at the peephole. Then there was the disappearance. That girl went missing. You heard about that, right? I was ashamed to admit that I didn't. Maybe it came up, maybe at one point I was told, but it was long since forgotten. They presumed her dead. Never found her. I knew it had something to do with the room, so I closed it for good. Nobody in or out unless absolutely necessary. I didn't know what to say. I was horrified. What must all of these people have seen? I shuddered to think. But also I still had questions. This sounded right, but there were glaring inconsistencies. I had to keep prodding. How did you get the police to go along with that? I asked first, attempting to remain composed. Didn't they do their business? They're in and out quick. They never find anything, and they don't really ask. It's the city. No, but they didn't go inside the room last night. Why didn't they go in? Mike shot me a confused look. They did go in. They went in, they searched, they found nothing like they always do. New guys, it's been a few years, but none of them do. I was getting frustrated again. Things weren't lining up. Why are you lying? Why lie about this? I know they didn't go in. I would have heard them if they went in. I hear Ivar YTNG that happens in there. And you clearly didn't close the room because you rented it out. It's occupied right now. And Jane said you told her about previous tenants when she moved in, so there were people even before her. Mike's expression completely dropped. You think someone lives there right now? Yes, someone lives there. Don't lie to me, I asserted. No one has lived there for 8 years, I miss you. He said coldly. I was boiling over. I lost my composure entirely. Someone lives there. Jane lives there. We both know damn well she does. I've spoken to her almost every day since she moved in. I've heard her clean. I've heard her shitty music. She's my friend, and she's in danger living in this fucking room, and you just let her go on in for what? Your bottom line. You really needed that extra rent money. What? For your camping trips. Mike raised his voice to match mine. Listen, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. Nobody lives in that fucking room. I won't allow it. You want to go see for yourself. Here, Mike rummaged around his desk and threw a set of keys at me. You have at it. Go have a look. It's an empty fucking room. And after you see that it's an empty room, do the smart thing, don't stick around. Don't go inside. Lock it back up, then pack your shit and get out because your room isn't safe anymore. I was stunned. I was angry. I was confused and slightly ashamed. I had no more to say, so I turned to leave, but then he spoke up one more time. Oh, and by the way, you really are shit with names because Jane, that's the name of the girl who went missing. Jane Lewis. My whole body went numb as I walked out. This couldn't be the truth. I couldn't have been talking to a dead person this whole time. I had guessed that this thing was using her voice somehow, but that was only at night. It can't have all been fake. Jane was my friend. I couldn't believe it. I refused to believe it. That walk up to my floor was the longest of my life. I approached Vol.2 with the key in my hand. I stopped in front of the door. I stood for what felt like hours. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Not right now. The thought of opening the door even for a moment, especially at night, was far too horrifying. I had to sit down and collect myself. I went inside my apartment and immediately sat on my bed. I wanted to cry. This was all too much, but all I could do was sit and shiver in silence until knock knock. I didn't have time to be startled, as a familiar voice immediately accompanied the knocks. Hey, I'm back. I stayed an extra night. I bet you love the peace and quiet. Anything happened? You didn't call, so I'm hoping we're all good. You gave me quite a scare. Jane in her normal, casual, optimistic Jane voice. I wanted to be able to trust her so badly. I needed a friend right now. And she made it so easy to trust her. So easy, how do I talk to her at what could I say? I couldn't find the words. You there? She asked calmly. Your number had said it was out of service. I muttered weakly. Really? What the hell? Are you sure you typed it in right? Yeah, I'm sure. I couldn't put any energy behind my voice. Are you okay? What happened? She responded, sounding genuinely concerned. You know, don't you? Know what? You're part of it. You're this thing. What are you talking about? Lay, you're not making sense. Is your name really Jane? Well, yeah, obviously. Why wouldn't it be? Jane Lewis. The wall fell silent for a moment. What the hell? Are you looking me up or something? That's messed up. Jane said, sounding shaken. Maybe I should look you up. Maybe I should. Since you're dead. What the f? Lay, you're scaring the shit out of me, okay? I think you need some help. I lost my composure again. You're dead. You died. Jane Lewis died, so who the fuck are you? And why are you doing this to me? I'm not dead. Why are you saying I'm dead? She shouted. She sounded so convincing, maybe she genuinely didn't know she was dead. Or maybe this was another trick. Your apartment is vacant. Nobody has lived there for 8 years. It's empty. You aren't real. I heard her laugh. That kind of exasperated laugh when you hear something so ridiculous your brain has trouble processing it. It was a very human-like response. Lay, that's not true. I don't know who's telling you this shit, but it's not true. I can assure you, I am real. I signed a lease. I have a fucking parking spot. I just went to see my sister and my nephew. We played Mario Kart and ate pizza. Pretty sure I wasn't a ghost to them. Listen to yourself. You're in your own head. I am real. I am your friend. At least I'm trying to be. Her voice began to crack at the end. I could almost hear the tears welling up. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I began to cry. She was trying to pull me back to a reality I had drifted so far from. God, I wanted everything she said to be true. Across the wall I could hear a few quiet sobs. It was so real. It had to be real. You're really scaring me. If this is a game, please just stop. It's sick. I'll leave. I'll pack my shit and I'll leave. Just please stop. My heart broke. I never wanted this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jane. I don't know what's happening with me. Nothing makes sense. The building manager told me all this shit, and I don't know what's real anymore. I need help. I almost let it all go. I almost convinced myself that I had totally lost it, and it was all in my head. It would have been so easy. All the pieces would fit together if none of it was real, but I had one more idea. I have a phone. Like I said to her, maybe I should look her up. If she went missing, there would be reports. All I have to do is type in her name. Jane Lewis plus the name of the city, enter. My heart sank further than I thought it could. There she was. The article came up immediately, and I saw her face for the first time, but I didn't think she was lying, not on purpose anyway. Those tears couldn't be fake. I refused to believe it. She really doesn't know. She's still stuck in that room, thinking she's alive. I looked at her picture for a while, so different from the ones my mind conjured up when we spoke. But her face fit her voice and personality like a glove. It radiated positive energy. The image of her in my mind was replaced with this new one instantaneously. Something about being able to attach the voice to the face made me trust her 10 times more. I knew this was really her in some form. I wasn't being tricked. I was certain. I didn't know if I should tell her that she was dead. A part of me thought there wouldn't be a point. There's no way she would believe me. But I felt like I had to. No more secrets. I needed this all out in the open. Whatever happens. Jane, I said hesitantly. I looked you up. I'm looking at the article right now. Lay, please, she begged. I continued and began reading the article aloud. Jane Adrienne Lewis, 26, last seen October 12, 2015, reported missing October 14, 15, declared dead October 14, 2022. Multiple searches turned up no leads. The initial suspect, ex-boyfriend Devin Aronson, whom had at the time been serving a restraining order from Jane, was exonerated. Her sister Carrie and mother Lynn continue to urge the public to come forward with any information they may have. I recited coldly, trying not to break. Jane was loved by her family, friends, and community, and is described as a kind soul, funny, passionate, and selfless. Her entrepreneurial spirit led her to start up multiple small businesses, dating all the way back to 8 years old when she would make and sell beaded bracelets and homemade baked goods to her classmates. Her mother, Lynn, quotes. I stopped myself. This was a lot to throw at her, and I think she got the point. She was silent for a minute, and then she spoke. October 12, 2015. Yes. 8 years ago, last month. That was the last time you were seen. 8 years ago, yeah. October 12th, 2015 is today, she said. You're telling me I go missing today. Everything turned upside down. Once again, I stammered. Words struggled to form. She was living out her final days all over again somehow. Nobody remembers the stupid bracelets. Only my mom remembers that shit. She continued. I'm sorry. It's not true. You're sick. You've been stalking me. Gathering all this information, what the fuck do you want? She screamed. There's a video, can I play it for you? She went silent. I took that as a yes. I turned the volume up, held the phone to the wall, and hit play on the embedded video. An older woman and a younger woman stood together in front of microphones on the front lawn of a small house. I could only assume her mom and her sister. She wouldn't accept it from me. Maybe she would accept it from them. Her mom didn't get through 2 sentences before I heard the most horrific sound I had ever heard coming from the other side of the wall. It sounded like all the air was sucked out of her while at the same time she screamed and wailed. It was like the scream I heard the day before. All she could say was, "No," over and over again. I heard her rocking back and forth on the bed it hit. She believed. "Sorry," I cried. But all I could do was wait and listen to her violent sobbing, her awful cries. I couldn't imagine what she must be going through. After a few minutes, the crying stopped, and she spoke through her sniffles. "Read me more. There has to be more." I obliged and continued skimming the article. The words, "an early prominent lead," jumped out at me, and I read the paragraph out loud. Jane's older sister told police about conversations the two had the day prior to her disappearance. Jane talked about making friends with a neighbor named Leah. I paused. The last thing I expected was my name to appear in this, albeit spelled wrong. My heart began to pound, and I continued. "Through whom she claimed she could hear through the unit's wall. However, when police searched, they found nobody by that name living in the building and weren't able to find any evidence of this mysterious Lee." "What the fuck?" Jane said, echoing my sentiments. You're alive. I'm really talking to you 8 years ago," I surmised. It was the only way that could make sense. "I've been trying to tell you I'm fucking alive." "Wait, maybe that means I can help you. You're supposed to die today, but maybe I can save you." "Okay, how?" I thought about it for a second, and the most obvious answer popped into my mind. "Get out. Get out of the room, now. It's in the room. You have to leave." What do you mean it's in the room?" "It's 4-2. Something bad is in 4-2. I hear it at night. You have to go right now. Stay with your sister." Okay, I'm going," she said frantically. I heard the bed shift as she began making her way off. Then I heard something else. "Wait," I shouted. "Don't move." "What?" "Why?" "Don't step off the bed. Stay on the why." It's breathe, hear it. It's under your bed." I softened my voice to a whisper, even though I didn't think it would do any good. "I can't hear anything. It's there. It's waiting. Don't set your foot off." "What do I do?" "I don't know." "Just wait. I don't want to die. You won't. We'll figure this out." I paced around the apartment, frantically trying to put the pieces together to try and find some answer. Some way I could save her. Then something struck me. I don't want to die. She said that to me last night, when she wasn't here. It was the same words, said in the same way. Like her scream was the same scream. It wasn't this thing mimicking her, it was HER. "I heard you when you weren't here." "How did I hear you when you weren't here? How did I hear you say something before you said it?" I asked, in desperate confusion. I don't know," she repeated. You said those exact words before the exact same way it was you. I thought maybe it was using your voice, but it was you now. I don't understand. I don't know, Jane. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. It doesn't make any sense." "Time," she said in a softer voice. "What?" "I read this book a little while ago. It was a poetry book." It sounded like she was just talking to calm herself down. Saying anything, thinking about anything. Just going back to a happy place. Anything to cope. It seemed like something she had to learn how to do. I let her continue while I searched my own mind for answers. One of the poems was about time. About how life is a cup and time is water being slowly poured into the cup. I can't remember exactly how it went, but the stream of water is your present, and it all collects and fills up to become your past, she said. I heard her lay back on her bed. I pictured her staring at the ceiling, fingers interlocked, scared out of her mind but trying her best to talk her way out of it. "I never heard that one," I replied. "It always feels like we're going somewhere because we're in the middle of the pour. But when you look at the past, it's all in the same place. You can take a sip from any of it. I always like that analogy for some reason. Maybe when we see ghosts, it's just time spilling. Out of their glass, out into the world for all to see. Maybe that's why we see them most at night. It's easy to spill things when it's dark." Her voice slowly grew calmer. I listened, fearing deep down that this might be the last time I hear it. She kept going. I don't think I spilled. Maybe a little bit in the dark. Maybe that's what you were hearing. But I think I poured my time out. To you. I mixed up our glasses. Because I needed to. Maybe she was right. There's no way of knowing, but it's a nice thought. We mixed our time. I pictured a plain milkshake in a blender, but with a little chocolate swirl cascading into the center. Or maybe I just threw my whole glass at the fucking wall, she said, chuckling faintly. I smiled. That would do it. The thing in that room, maybe it spilled too. Spilled over here from someplace else. I surmised. The wall went silent. It was silent for a long time. Too long. Then the creak. The creak I had become so familiar with. She sat up, Janet. I shall see it. Her breath was shaky. Her words were weak. It's with me now. Get out of there. Run. Just run, I shouted. I can't move. Please help me, Lay, please. She begged. I couldn't take any more. I couldn't think any more. I took the keys Mike gave me. I grabbed a big kitchen knife, and I stormed out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't know what I would do or what I could do. I just had to get to her. Without hesitation, I plunged the key into the lock of 402 and burst through the door, letting it slowly close behind me. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I took in what I saw in the brief moments when the room was illuminated by the hallway light, and it was everything Mike said it was. Empty, completely empty, unkempt and unclean. The dust was thick. There was absolutely no mistaking the fact that this place was abandoned. Now though, with the door closed, all of those details were replaced by a thick blanket of darkness. So dark. Darker than my apartment ever was. I tried the lights and they didn't come on. Jane. I shouted again as I walked further into the blackness, but there was no response. She wasn't here, but she was. She was on her bed, helpless, staring at something that was about to kill her. That was happening 8 years ago, but it was happening right now. I just couldn't see it. There wasn't even a bed here anymore. I stood right where it should be and there was nothing. Please answer me, Jane. I should be able to hear her, I thought. I tried to even just feel her presence somehow, but I couldn't feel anything except dread. Was I too late? I called out to her again and again. Nothing. I turned my attention to her tormentor. Leave her alone. What are you? Show yourself, what the fuck was saying? What the adrenaline was too high. I didn't even fully realize the scope of the shit I was in, but it was beginning to dawn on me. This thing, it killed Jane. It torments people. It carves them up. And I just walked right into its mouth. I liked Jane's theory about time, but maybe it was this thing that did it. It mixed up our time, it put us together to lure me over here. 8 years without a victim, and it was starving. It knew we would connect, it knew I would come to save her. It got me right where it wanted me. In my adrenaline-fueled haze, I walked far away from the door without even realizing it. I was on the other side of the room. I could make a run for it, but I froze. The soundproofing panels were gone, but the place was just as silent. The intense dark made my vision fuzzy and grainy. Dark spots and subtle shapes manifested and dissipated, tricking my eyes. I tried to scan the room. All I could really make out was some of the basic geometry. The only light was an inch-tall line coming from under the front door. It could be hiding in any one of these pitch-black corners. Standing there, watching me hyperventilate. There was a sliding closet door next to the front door, very slightly open. Mike said something about people seeing it in the closet. I could imagine its eye peeking out. Maybe that's where it hid in the daytime, watching Jane and listening to us. Something moved above me. I looked to the ceiling but saw only black. It could be up there too. Sprawled out on the ceiling like some kind of spider, looking down at me, waiting to pounce. I wouldn't know. More movement in the far corners of my periphery. I turned to face it out of instinct and was again met with the void. I wanted to think it was all a trick of my eyes, but I knew better. I told my body to run. It was time to run. My body didn't want to move, but I had no choice. I couldn't stay here. As much as it killed me, I was quickly realizing there was no saving Jane. There never was. I was still as powerless as I had been this entire time, so I had to go. Now, then I heard it. Creak. The floorboard right in front of the door I was so anxious to get to. I turned and looked towards the door, and I saw at the line of light under the door was now broken by 2 dark pillars. It was standing right there. It was too dark to make out any other features, or maybe it didn't have any. All I could make out was a shadow amongst the shadows. The vaguest confirmation of a form. My legs fell out from under me and I came down hard. I kicked my feet and crawled back against the furthest corner. I didn't take my eyes off of it. I didn't dare to even blink. It didn't move. After a moment, the floorboards began to creak subtly again and again. But it still wasn't moving. It sounded like it was only slightly shifting its weight from one foot to the other and back again. It was swaying. I really was trapped now. It wasn't going to let me get to the door. I put my hands on the wall behind me to help me push myself back up. One of my hands touched something wet. The wall was damp and squishy. Instinctually, I looked to see what I was touching, and my eyes were able to adjust enough to make out that it was mold. A ton of mold, coating several feet of the wall. I recoiled in disgust, but it quickly all started to add up. This mold was exactly where the mold in my apartment was. It was the same mold on both sides the guys who replaced my drywall. They never looked on the other side, but now that I thought about it, the day after they opened my wall was the day this all started. Opening the wall opened the threshold. That's how it must have found me. These revelations ripped through my mind within a few seconds, but the ultimate realization was that I took my eyes off of it. I quickly turned back. The line of light was unbroken again. It moved. It could be anywhere now. It was toying with me like it toyed with all the others. I began to feel my feet go numb, just like how Jane's did. I couldn't make a run for it anymore. This was it. It was coming for me. In my desperation, I took my knife and jammed it into the moldy wall. It slid in, so I stabbed it again and again. Then I dropped the knife and forced my hands inside, pulling and ripping and tearing at the decay. Some parts tore away easy, others were still rough and hard. Amidst the crumbling and the squishing sounds of the wall being pulled apart and the sounds of my own struggling, the creaks began again. Coming closer now. The tips of my fingers screamed in pain. My fingernails bent and broke as drywall lodged itself behind them, but I continued tearing at it with everything I had. It felt like I had an extra pair of hands. The creaks got closer. The numbness crept up my legs. The breathing I heard time and time again I could now feel in the back of my neck. Then that awful sound of teeth chattering inches away from my ear. Eventually, the hole was big enough for me to crawl into, and I hosted myself inside with every bit of strength I had left. My body barely fit between the drywall and the solid concrete. I squeezed in as best as I could. I knew this wasn't an escape. This was just the only thing I could do. Maybe this would be far enough outside of its physical domain. Sound could travel past the wall, but maybe it couldn't. It was a stretch, but it's all I had. It was pitch black in here. I couldn't even see myself. I was at the whim of the warbling fuzz of my own retinas. It stopped moving, but it continued to breathe, right next to my ear. Maybe I was right and it couldn't get inside. Time passed, the breathing faded. My heart rate began to slow, and the intense pain in my hands crept to the surface. I didn't know how long it had been, but it felt like ages. At this point, I was waiting for the sun to come up, but instead it stayed pitch black. I finally decided to take a peek outside of the hole, just to see a glimpse of that line of light again. I reached my hand toward the edge of the hole to pull myself towards it, but I couldn't find it. I ran my hand along the whole surface. I couldn't find the hole. It was gone. It was like it was never there. The wall was perfectly smooth and solid. I began to hyperventilate again. Then I began to scream. I screamed for help until my throat went coarse. I hit the wall as hard as I could over and over, and it wouldn't budge. I couldn't see the blood, but I felt it trickle down my knuckles. I managed to dislodge a wooden stud, but that offered no help. I fought until I had no more fight left in me. Then I sat back, staring into the blackness once again, defeated. Only there was something different this time. I could only describe it as something darker than pitch black. A little fuzzy orb of it, floating past the wooden stud that I broke off. I pulled myself closer and my eyes very slowly began to adjust. It wasn't an orb, I began to discover. It was 3 orbs arranged in an inverted triangle. I pulled myself closer again. No, not orbs, they were holes. I couldn't fully make it out until I was a mere foot away from it. Then I gasped in horror. A face. Sunken black holes for the eyes and mouth. Withered and shrouded in a veil of cobwebs. I could barely make out the rest of the body. Slumped over and sitting like I was decayed to bones. There she was. The veiled woman, but not just the veiled woman, was Jane. She was here all this time. It probably tricked her into the wall the same way it tricked me. Tears welled up immediately and turned to frantic sobs. No, Janie, please, no. I thought I could save you. Please don't be gone. I knew she was dead, but actually seeing her like this broke me beyond repair. It's sunken now. That last glimmer of hope I had was gone. My friend is dead and she died afraid. You can't be gone. Tell me one of your jokes. You're supposed to tell me them every day. You can't miss a day. You have, please. I was hysterical, thinking about her scared and alone and trapped for God knows how long. Never being found. It shattered me over and over. I couldn't save her. I couldn't reassure her, couldn't make things better. I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't bring her or her family closure because I was going to die in this place too, and neither of us would ever be found. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Give me more time. Spill me more time. Just a little more. I begged. But nothing happened. The next few hours were agony, staring at the empty, decomposed husk of the girl I failed, replaying every single decision I made, thinking about how I could have done it differently. I was always too late, always one step behind, too scared, too uncertain. I always knew I was like this, I always have been, but I didn't think it mattered. I figured the only life I could ruin was my own. I began doing our knocks on the wall, over and over, hoping maybe she would hear it somewhere, sometime. Maybe would reach her at a time when she needed to know someone was still with her. That's probably not how it worked, but it's all I had left. I was hungry, dehydrated. My lips were sticking together. My vision got even spottier. Occasionally I would sleep as much as I could. I tried to move my arms and my body every now and then to stop them from becoming completely stiff, but they hurt like hell. 2 days passed. I continued knocking. I was in a haze when I saw an axe crash through the wall, bringing with it a beam of blinding light. It crashed through several more times. The light scorched my eyes. I heard a voice and yelling, but I couldn't discern it. Before long, I was being pulled out of the wall. The pain in my muscles was unbearable. My eyes wouldn't focus, and my brain wouldn't unscramble, but I could think just enough to repeat. Jane is in there, as I was dragged away before I completely lost consciousness. I awoke in a hospital room, once again blinded by all the light, but my eyes eventually focused on Mike. He told me he regretted giving me the key to 402 and came to check on me when he saw the key still in the lock. That's when he heard me knocking, and he got me out. I told him I was grateful and that I was sorry. The police and the paramedics came and collected Jane's body. Mike told me what story to use to explain what happened. Say I heard some rats and took it upon myself to set traps in the wall when I got stuck and found Jane. It worked well enough for them. I got fired for missing work, which made me laugh, and it goes without saying that I had to find a new place to live. I went back to my apartment after I got discharged, gathered everything I could in about 20 minutes, and left. Right before I shut the door, I knocked twice on the wall one more time. Just because. Jane's sister reached out to say thank you on behalf of her and her family. I wish I could tell them more, but there was no way. All I could do was wish them the best. I believe they're trying to sue Mike for criminal negligence. I struggled to find a new place and a new job. I got fired a few times for being too inattentive or slow. I wasn't sleeping or eating. I had panic attacks and night terrors. I couldn't bear the dark or the quiet. The things I saw I couldn't escape, but beyond the fear and the trauma, it was the guilt that was the worst. I saw her face everywhere. Her dead face haunted me while I slept, and her living face haunted me while I was awake. Neither face would ever forgive me. I didn't have enough money to drink away the sorrow. I was forced to face it all every day. Dating was off the table. I wouldn't subject someone else to myself in the state I was in. I thought long and hard about giving up in those next few months. I got closer and closer to making that decision. I started stockpiling prescription pills and drafting final letters. I only felt more and more ready as the days passed. But on the day I chose, and the time I chose, I heard 2 knocks on my wall.